Luke Harlan's hands were steady on the wrench when he heard the barn door creak open behind him. He'd fixed 1,000 tractors in his 15 years as a mechanic, but nothing prepared him for the moment he turned around. Standing in the dusty sunlight was Emily Carter, the girl who'd vanished from his life without explanation, taking his heart with her. Now she was back. A billionaire with secrets in her eyes, and the broken tractor between them was about to become the least complicated thing in his world. Before we dive into this emotional journey, I want to invite you to stick with me until the very end, because what happens when Luke discovers the truth will absolutely break your heart before it heals it. And please, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel across the world. The Nebraska sun hung low and amber over the Crawford County auto repair shop, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt where Luke Harlan knelt beside a '98 Chevy pickup, his hands black with grease, his mind somewhere between the present and the pile of overdue bills sitting on his kitchen counter. 33 years old, and sometimes he felt like he'd lived 3 lifetimes already. High school athlete with dreams bigger than the cornfields, young husband who thought love conquered all, and now for the past 4 years, single father trying to be enough for a daughter who deserved everything. "Dad, can we get pizza tonight?" Maddie's voice rang out from inside the shop, where she sat at the cluttered desk doing homework, her backpack decorated with hand-drawn stars and the words, "Maddie's Rocket Ship," in purple marker. Luke wiped his forehead with the back of his arm, leaving a smear of oil across his temple. "We had pizza Tuesday, kiddo." That was 4 days ago. That's basically ancient history. He couldn't help but smile. 8 years old, and already she could negotiate like a lawyer. She had her mother's sharp mind. That was undeniable. But thankfully none of Sarah's restlessness, that constant need to be somewhere else, someone else, anywhere but in the small town she'd called a prison. "Tell you what," Luke said, standing up and stretching his back, feeling the familiar ache that came with crawling under vehicles all day. "If I finish Mrs. Henderson's truck before 5, we'll stop by Tony's on the way home. Deal?" "Deal?" Maddie pumped her fist in the air, then immediately returned to her math worksheet with renewed focus, as if her concentration alone could make 5 o'clock arrive faster. Luke was reaching for his socket wrench when his cell phone buzzed in his pocket. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Telemarketers had been relentless lately, like they could smell financial desperation through the phone lines. But something made him swipe to accept. "Harlan Repairs," he said, tucking the phone against his shoulder as he worked. "Yes, hello. I'm calling from Carter Agricultural Operations. We have a tractor that's given up the ghost, and we were told you're the best mechanic in 3 counties for vintage farm equipment." Luke paused. Carter Agricultural Operations. Everyone in Nebraska knew that name, or at least the new version of it. Emily Carter. No, Emily Carter Whitmore now, he reminded himself, though he'd never actually confirmed if she'd taken her ex-husband's name, had transformed her family's struggling farm into some kind of agricultural empire. He'd seen the articles in the Omaha World Herald, read the headlines about innovation and sustainability and technology that sounded like science fiction. Billionaire farm heiress revolutionizes Midwest agriculture. That sort of thing. But he'd never let himself look too closely at the photos accompanying those articles. Hadn't let himself wonder if the eyes staring back from glossy magazine pages still crinkled at the corners when she laughed, or if she still tucked her hair behind her left ear when she was thinking hard about something. "What kind of tractor?" Luke asked, his voice carefully neutral. "A 1987 John Deere 4450. I know it's old, but Ms. Carter is particular about this machine. She refuses to replace it. We've had 3 mechanics out here, and none of them could get it running properly. Your name kept coming up." Luke's hand tightened on the wrench. A 87 John Deere 4450. Forest green, yellow accents, diesel engine with more personality than sense. He knew that tractor. Hell, he'd practically grown up with that tractor. "When do you need someone out there?" The words came out before his practical side could intervene with all the reasons this was a terrible idea. "Would tomorrow morning work? Say, 8 o'clock? The farm is about 40 minutes north of Crawford, off Highway 71. I can text you the exact coordinates." Luke glanced over at Maddie, who was now doodling rockets in the margins of her homework, her tongue poking out in concentration the way it always did when she was creating something. Tomorrow was Saturday. No school. He'd have to bring her with him. Couldn't afford a babysitter, and Mrs. Kowalski next door had her own grandkids visiting. 8 o'clock works, he heard himself say. And ma'am, you can tell Miss Carter that Luke Harlan will be handling the repair personally. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Luke Harlan? Oh my. I'll let her know. Thank you, Mr. Harlan. The call ended, and Luke stood there in the fading sunlight, the phone still pressed to his ear, his heart doing something complicated in his chest. 15 years. 15 years since that July night when Emily had told him she was leaving for college in California, that she couldn't stay in Nebraska, couldn't stay with him, couldn't live the small life this small town offered. He'd been 21 days away from proposing, had the ring and everything, a modest diamond from the jewelry store in Geraing, paid for with 6 months of saved paychecks from his job at the feed store. She'd left anyway. And he'd stayed, married Sarah 3 years later in what he now recognized as an attempt to prove he could move forward, had a beautiful daughter, and then watched his wife leave too, chasing some fantasy of excitement in Denver with a pharmaceutical sales rep named Derek. Dad? You okay? Maddie's voice snapped him back to the present. Luke pocketed his phone and smiled, the expression feeling slightly cracked around the edges. Yeah, kiddo, just got a job for tomorrow. Big farm out past Whitman. Might take most of the day. Can I come? Don't see why not. Might even be interesting. They've got all kinds of high-tech equipment out there, from what I hear. Maddie's eyes lit up. She'd been obsessed with science lately, constantly checking out books from the library about space and engineering and robotics. Last week, she'd tried to build a pulley system to lift her backpack to her top bunk, which had resulted in a broken lamp and a lengthy discussion about load-bearing capacity. Cool. Can I bring my notebook? Sure thing. Now, let me finish this truck so we can get that pizza. That night, after Maddie had fallen asleep with a book about Mars rovers still open on her chest, Luke sat at his kitchen table with a beer he wasn't really drinking and a calculator that kept showing him numbers he didn't want to see. Rent was due in 12 days. Maddie needed new sneakers. Her toes were starting to press against the front of her current pair. The shop's liability insurance was coming up for renewal, and the premium had jumped 18%. He pulled up his bank account on his phone, winced at the balance, then opened his email to check if any of the invoices he'd sent out had been paid. Mrs. Henderson's truck repair, $340. The Johnsons' transmission work, $890, both marked as pending. His phone buzzed with a text. The coordinates for Carter Agricultural Operations, along with a gate code and a note. Please proceed to the main barn complex. Someone will meet you there. Luke zoomed in on the map, studying the satellite view of the property. It was massive. Hundreds of acres of precisely organized fields, several large structures that had to be barns or storage facilities, and in the center, what looked like a modern compound of buildings that definitely hadn't been there 15 years ago, when this had just been the Carter family farm, struggling like every other farm in the county to stay afloat. He shouldn't have Googled her. He knew that even as he typed Emily Carter, Nebraska into the search bar, but his thumb hit enter anyway, and suddenly his screen filled with images and articles. There she was. Professional headshots on corporate websites, candid photos at agricultural conferences, a TED Talk thumbnail where she stood on stage in front of a massive screen displaying crop data. Her hair was shorter now, cut in a sleek style that brushed her shoulders instead of falling down her back in the wild waves he remembered. She wore tailored blazers and confident smiles, looked at ease in boardrooms and laboratories, nothing like the girl who used to steal her father's truck so they could drive out to the old reservoir and watch the stars. But her eyes, those were the same. Brown with flecks of gold when the light hit them right, always seeming to see more than what was on the surface. Luke scrolled through an article from Bloomberg. Emily Carter's Agritech Revolution. How one woman is saving the family farm with science. It detailed her journey from Stanford graduate to struggling farm manager after her father's death, then her breakthrough development of some kind of smart irrigation system that had attracted venture capital investment and eventually led to the creation of Carter Agritech, a company now valued at over $800 million. $800 million. Luke looked around his kitchen. The linoleum floor he'd been meaning to replace for 3 years The refrigerator covered in Maddie's artwork held up with magnets from various auto parts stores. The table he'd bought at a yard sale and refinished himself, and felt the full weight of the distance between his life and Emily's. What was he doing? He should call in the morning, make up some excuse, recommend another mechanic. This was ridiculous. She probably wouldn't even remember him. Not really. 15 years was a long time. She'd built an empire, married a venture capitalist, divorced now, according to a 2-year-old article in Fortune, traveled the world, changed agriculture as we knew it, and he'd stayed in Crawford, Nebraska, population 997, fixing trucks and tractors and trying to be enough for his daughter. But even as he thought about canceling, he knew he wouldn't. Because underneath all the sensible reasons to stay away was the truth he'd never quite buried. He'd never stopped wondering about what might have been. And maybe, just maybe, this was his chance to finally get closure, to see that she'd moved on completely, that the connection they'd had was just youthful nostalgia, nothing that could survive in the real world of responsibilities and choices and time. He closed the browser, finished his beer, and went to bed. But sleep was slow to come, and when it did, his dreams were full of dusty barns and summer sunlight and a girl with hay in her hair, laughing as they worked side by side on an impossible machine, believing they could fix anything as long as they worked together. The drive to the Carter farm the next morning took 43 minutes, most of it on 2-lane highways that cut through fields already harvested for the season, leaving behind golden stubble and the smell of earth preparing for winter. Maddie chattered the entire way about a documentary she'd watched about agricultural drones, barely pausing for breath, her excitement infectious enough that Luke almost forgot about the knot in his stomach. Almost. The entrance to Carter Agricultural Operations was marked by a sleek metal sign and a gate that opened automatically when Luke entered the code. The driveway, paved, not gravel like most farm roads, wound through what looked like experimental crop fields, each section marked with digital displays showing soil moisture levels and growth data. "Dad, this place is so cool." Maddie pressed her face against the window. "Look, they have weather stations. And are those solar panels?" "Sure looks like it." Luke kept his voice steady, his hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel as they rounded a curve and the main compound came into view. It was stunning. Traditional barn architecture blended seamlessly with modern design, weathered wood and stone alongside glass and steel. Solar panels covered several rooftops. Wind turbines turned lazily in the distance. But the centerpiece was the original barn, the one he remembered, now clearly restored and expanded, but still fundamentally the same structure where he and Emily had spent countless afternoons working on the tractor that had belonged to her grandfather. Luke parked his truck next to a row of expensive-looking vehicles, a Tesla, a Range Rover, several Priuses with Carter Agritech logos on the doors, and felt acutely aware of the rust spots on his Ford F-150, the slightly taped passenger mirror, the bumper sticker that said, "I'd rather be fixing something," that Maddie had given him 2 Christmases ago. "Remember, you stick close to me, okay? This is a working farm with expensive equipment." "I know, Dad. I'll be careful." Maddie grabbed her purple backpack and climbed out, immediately spinning in a circle to take everything in. "It's like a farm from the future." Luke grabbed his tool bag from the truck bed, a battered red case that had been his father's, worn smooth from 30 years of use, and took a deep breath. Just a job, he told himself. Just a tractor repair. Nothing more complicated than mechanical problems with mechanical solutions. They were halfway to the main barn when the door swung open and a young woman in a Carter Agritech polo shirt emerged, tablet in hand, efficient smile in place. "Mr. Harlan? I'm Jessica Chen, Operations Coordinator. Thank you so much for coming out on a Saturday. Ms. Carter really appreciates—" She stopped mid-sentence as a voice called out from inside the barn. "Jess, did you tell Marcus we need the soil samples from Field 7 before—" And then Emily Carter stepped into the sunlight, and the entire world narrowed down to that single moment. She was wearing jeans and work boots, a faded denim shirt with the sleeves rolled up, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that was already coming loose. There was a smudge of what looked like engine grease on her jaw. She held a wrench in one hand and her phone in the other, clearly mid-multitask, and she looked so much like the girl he remembered that Luke forgot how to breathe. Then her eyes landed on him, and he watched her entire body go still. Luke, his name came out barely above a whisper. Hey, Em. 15 years collapsed into nothing. He could see it all playing across her face, surprise, confusion, something that might have been joy, something else that looked like pain. Her fingers tightened on the wrench she was holding, her phone temporarily forgotten. Jessica glanced between them, clearly sensing the sudden shift in atmosphere. I'll go check on those soil samples. Neither Luke nor Emily acknowledged her departure. They stood there, 20 feet of Nebraska farmland between them, carrying the weight of a decade and a half of silence. I didn't know you were, Emily started. I didn't realize this was, Luke said at the same time. They both stopped. A ghost of a smile touched Emily's lips, the familiar crooked one that had always been his undoing. You first, she said softly. I didn't realize this was your family's old place. I mean, I knew Carter Agricultural Operations bought it after your dad passed, but I didn't put it together that you... He stopped, regrouped. I'm sorry. About your dad. I should have said that years ago. Something flickered in her eyes. Thank you. And I didn't know the mechanic would be you. My assistant made the arrangements. If I'd known... She trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. If she'd known, what? Would she have called? Not called? Dad? Maddie's small voice cut through the tension. She'd been standing quietly beside him, watching this strange interaction with the sharp observational skills she'd inherited from both her parents. Is this the broken tractor? Emily's gaze dropped to Maddie, and Luke watched something soften in her expression. Hi there. You must be, Maddie, I'm 8 3/4. I came to help my dad with the repair, but mostly I'm here to learn about your farm because I'm really interested in agricultural technology and sustainable farming practices. She delivered this in one confident rush, the way she did when she was nervous but determined not to show it. Emily's smile widened, became more genuine. Well, Maddie, who's 8 3/4, I think we're going to get along great. I love meeting people who care about sustainable farming. And yes, this, she gestured with her wrench toward the barn interior, is where our very stubborn tractor is waiting for someone smart enough to fix it. My dad's the smartest, Maddie said matter-of-factly. He can fix anything. Luke felt his neck warm. Maddie, it's true. Emily's eyes met his again, and there was something in them that made his chest tight. Your dad was always the best at fixing impossible things. Some of us were smart enough to learn that before it was too late. The weight of unspoken history hung in the air between them. Luke cleared his throat. Well, why don't you show me this impossible thing then? They walked into the barn together, and it was like stepping through a portal into memory. The structure had been updated. New lighting, climate control systems, organized tool stations with equipment that probably cost more than Luke's annual income. But the bones were the same. The same old wood beams overhead, the same hayloft where they used to sit and plan their futures, the same smell of machine oil and earth and possibility. And there, in the center of the barn, covered in a fine layer of dust and wearing its years with stubborn dignity, sat the 1987 John Deere 4450. Luke set down his tool bag and circled the machine slowly, his mechanic's eye cataloging the details. Someone had tried to repair it recently. There were new parts that didn't quite match, fresh scratches where panels had been removed and replaced, the telltale signs of mechanics who understood modern equipment but not the quirks of vintage machinery. 3 mechanics, you said? Luke ran his hand along the engine housing, feeling the familiar ridges and dips, the places where the metal had worn smooth from decades of use. 3. Emily came to stand beside him, close enough that he could smell her shampoo, something different from the drugstore brand she'd used in high school, something that probably cost more than his electric bill, but it suited her. The last one told me I should just scrap it and buy something new. He said parts aren't even made anymore for these models. Parts are available if you know where to look, Luke said, though they're not cheap. And honestly, depending on what's wrong, it might be more practical to... I'm not scrapping it. Emily's voice was firm. This was my grandfather's tractor. My dad drove it for 30 years, and it's the same one we... She stopped herself, seemed to reconsider her words. I know it seems sentimental and impractical, but it matters to me. Luke understood. God, did he understand. This tractor represented more than farm equipment. It was the summer they'd spent restoring it together. Two kids who thought they could rebuild anything, who believed hard work and determination could overcome any obstacle. They'd taken it completely apart, laid every piece out in this very barn, cleaned and repaired and reassembled with YouTube tutorials and his father's old repair manuals and sheer stubborn will. It had been the best summer of his life. Tell me what it's doing, he said, pulling himself back to the present. Professional. This was just a job. Emily walked him through the symptoms: irregular starting, power loss under load, strange noises from the transmission, exhaust that ran darker than it should. Classic signs of multiple system failures, the kind of cascading problems that happened when one issue was patched without addressing the root cause. Maddie had wandered over to a workbench where several drones were in various states of assembly, her eyes wide. Are these for the farm? Emily glanced over, smiled. They are. We use them for crop monitoring, pest detection, even precision fertilizer application. Do you want to see one in action? Really? Yes. Maddie, Ms. Carter's busy, Luke started, but Emily waved him off. I've got a few minutes, and please call me Emily. Ms. Carter makes me feel like I should be wearing a suit and sitting in a boardroom. She looked at Maddie. Come on, I'll show you the control room. We can probably even get one of the drones up if the wind's not too bad. Maddie shot Luke a pleading look, and he found himself nodding despite every instinct that said this was a bad idea, that spending time with Emily, watching her interact with his daughter, was only going to make everything more complicated. Stay where Emily can see you, he said, and don't touch anything unless she says it's okay. I won't. Thanks, Dad. Maddie grabbed her backpack and followed Emily toward a door at the far end of the barn, already asking 100 questions about drone technology and crop monitoring. Emily paused at the doorway, looked back at Luke. The tool station in the corner has anything you might need. Premium parts are in the climate-controlled cabinet. Code is 1987, same as the tractor. And Luke? She hesitated, seemed to be weighing her words carefully. It's really good to see you, even if this is complicated. Yeah, he said quietly. You too. Then she was gone, Maddie's excited chatter fading as they moved deeper into the facility, and Luke was alone with the tractor and his thoughts, and the overwhelming sensation that he'd just stepped into something far more complex than a simple repair job. He opened his tool bag, pulled out his work gloves, and got started. The familiar ritual of diagnosis helped settle his mind, checking fuel lines, testing electrical connections, examining the hydraulic system for leaks. The work was meditative, each step building on the last, the kind of problem-solving that had always made sense to him in a way that human relationships never quite did. An hour passed. The problems revealed themselves gradually: clogged fuel injectors, a failing alternator, transmission fluid that hadn't been changed in far too long, and, most concerning, a crack in the engine block that had been poorly patched by someone who clearly didn't understand the stress points on these old machines. Luke was elbow-deep in the engine compartment, swearing softly at a seized bolt when he heard footsteps approaching. How bad is it? Emily's voice came from behind him. He straightened, wiping his hands on a shop rag. Honestly, it's worse than I expected. That last mechanic did some damage trying to force repairs that weren't appropriate for this model. The fuel system needs a complete overhaul, the electrical is a mess, and there's a crack in the engine block that's been patched with the wrong kind of epoxy. It's holding for now, but under heavy load. He shook his head. I can fix it, but it's going to take time and some specialized parts. And Em, I have to be straight with you. The cost of the repair is probably more than the tractor's market value. I don't care about market value. She moved closer, stood next to him looking at the exposed engine like she could will it back to health through sheer determination. Can you really fix the engine block? I can try. There's a specialty welder in Alliance who owes me a favor. If we can get the crack properly welded and reinforced, and if the rest of the block doesn't have microfractures, it's possible. Emily turned to look at him fully, and they were standing close enough that he could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the small scar on her chin from when she'd fallen off the hayloft ladder at 16. Why do you think I called you? Everyone else said it was impossible, but I knew if anyone could figure it out, it would be you. You didn't call me. Your assistant, Luke. She said his name softly, a small smile playing at her lips. You really think I didn't know who you were when your name came up? When 3 mechanics failed, I specifically asked my team to find the best vintage farm equipment specialist in the region. Your name was at the top of every list, and maybe I hoped... She trailed off, looked away. Maybe I hoped it would be a chance to... I don't know. See you again, talk to you, apologize. Luke's heart was doing something complicated in his chest. Apologize for what? For leaving the way I did. For not... She ran a hand through her hair, dislodging her ponytail further. For not being braver about what I wanted. For choosing the easy path instead of the hard conversation. Before Luke could respond, before he could even begin to process what she was saying, Maddie's voice rang out from across the barn. Dad! Emily! Come see this! The drone found something weird in Field 7. They both turned to see Maddie running toward them, Emily's tablet in hand, her face flushed with excitement. Behind her, Jessica was following, looking concerned. Maddie, you shouldn't have... Luke started, but Emily held up a hand. It's fine. What did you find, Maddie? Maddie thrust the tablet toward them, showing a drone's eye view of one of the fields. Even Luke, who knew nothing about crop management, could see that something was wrong. While most of the field showed uniform growth patterns, one section displayed a distinct dark patch where the plants looked stunted or dying. Emily's expression shifted immediately from casual to intensely focused. She took the tablet, fingers flying across the screen, pulling up data overlays. That's not good. That's our heritage wheat trial. Jessica, get soil samples from that area immediately and check the irrigation logs. I want to know if there's been any fluctuation in water delivery to that zone. On it. Jessica was already on her phone making calls. What's heritage wheat? Maddie asked, bouncing on her toes. Emily's expression softened, even as worry remained in her eyes. It's a special type of wheat that my grandfather saved seeds from for 40 years. It's adapted to our specific soil and climate, more resistant to drought than modern varieties, and it makes flour that tastes like wheat used to taste before big agriculture bred flavor out in favor of yield. We've been trying to scale up production, but it's tricky. And if that section is failing, Luke asked, though he suspected he knew the answer, then we might lose the entire seed stock. That dark patch is exactly where we concentrated the parent plants for next year's propagation. Emily was already walking toward the barn entrance, tablet in hand. I need to get out there and see what's happening. Can I come? Maddie asked immediately. Please. I promise I'll just watch and learn and not touch anything. Luke opened his mouth to say no, that they should probably head home and let Emily handle her farm emergency. But Emily spoke first. I'd actually love to have you both come. Luke, you might be able to spot something I miss. You always saw patterns differently than I did. And Maddie, you found the problem. You should see how we solve it. And that was how Luke found himself 20 minutes later standing in the middle of a wheat field, watching Emily direct her team with the kind of quiet competence that made it clear why she was running a multi-million-dollar operation. She was on her knees in the dirt, examining plants with a practiced eye, collecting samples, asking questions that demonstrated an understanding of agronomy that went far beyond what he remembered from their high school days. Maddie crouched beside her, mimicking her movements, absorbing everything like a sponge. See how the leaves have this yellowish tinge? Emily held up a wheat stalk for Maddie to examine. That usually indicates nitrogen deficiency. But look at the roots, they're actually healthy. So the problem isn't in the soil necessarily. It might be water quality, Maddie suggested. If something contaminated the irrigation water, it would affect only the plants that receive that water, right? Emily's head snapped up, her eyes meeting Luke's with sudden realization. That's exactly right. Maddie, you're brilliant. She was already on her phone. Marcus, I need you to test the water in the reservoir that feeds Field 7. Check for, yes, everything. Pesticide runoff, pH levels, mineral content. Something got into the water supply. As Emily coordinated the emergency response, Luke found himself watching her with a mixture of admiration and something else he didn't want to name. This was who she'd become, Someone who could command a team, solve complex problems, build something revolutionary from the ground up. She'd left Nebraska to become this person, left him to become this person, and he couldn't even be angry about it because the alternative would have been watching her wilt in a small town that had nothing to offer someone with her drive and vision. "Your daughter is exceptional," Emily said quietly, coming to stand beside him while her team worked in the background. Maddie was helping collect samples, carefully labeling bags under Jessica's supervision. How old did she say she was? 8? 8 3/4. She's precise about these things. Luke smiled, watching his daughter. Her mother left when she was 4, moved to Denver with her boyfriend. She sends birthday cards sometimes, calls every few months, but mostly, it's just been me and Maddie. "I'm sorry." Emily's voice was soft. "That must have been hard, but you're doing an incredible job. She's smart and confident and curious, all the best things. Some days I'm sure I'm screwing it up. Single parent, limited income, can't always give her everything she wants or needs." The admission came out before he could stop it, the kind of vulnerable truth he usually kept locked away. "Sounds like you're giving her exactly what she needs most, your presence and your time." Emily turned to look at him. "That's worth more than anything money can buy. Trust me, I know." There was a story there, Luke realized. Something in her voice suggested wounds of her own, choices that had consequences she was still carrying. Before he could ask, Jessica called out that they had preliminary results. Emily squeezed his arm briefly, a gesture so familiar it hurt, and then jogged back to her team, back to solving problems, back to the world she'd built that was so far removed from the life they'd once imagined together. They ended up staying at the farm until late afternoon. Emily insisted on buying them lunch from a local deli that delivered. Sandwiches that cost more than Luke typically spent on groceries for 3 days, but he was too hungry to argue. They ate in the barn, Maddie peppering Emily with questions about crop rotation and soil health and carbon sequestration, while Luke worked on creating a parts list for the tractor repair. The irrigation water had indeed been contaminated. Agricultural runoff from a neighboring property that used pesticides Emily's organic farm didn't allow. She'd already called her lawyers and filed a formal complaint with the county, all while explaining to Maddie how water rights worked and why sustainable farming meant thinking about the entire ecosystem, not just your own property. "You should come back," Emily said as they were packing up to leave. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and for a moment Luke could pretend they were teenagers again, finishing up a day's work before heading to the reservoir. "I mean, to finish the repair, obviously. The parts you need will take a week or so to arrive, right?" "About that, yeah." Luke hefted his tool bag. "I'll call once I have everything lined up. Should be able to knock it out in a long day, maybe 2 if the engine block welding doesn't hold." "Come for dinner." The words came out in a rush, like Emily had been holding them back and they'd finally escaped. "Next Saturday. Bring Maddie. We can work on the tractor, but also, I'd like to catch up, properly, without work emergencies interrupting." Luke should have said no. Every rational part of his brain was screaming that this was a terrible idea, that spending more time with Emily was only going to resurrect feelings he'd spent 15 years burying. But Maddie was looking at him with pleading eyes, and Emily was standing there in the golden light, looking hopeful and nervous, and the word that came out of his mouth was, "Okay." Emily's smile was brilliant. "Really? Okay, great. Saturday at 6? I'll cook, or, well, I'll have someone cook. I've gotten better at a lot of things over the years, but cooking isn't one of them." Emily Carter can't cook? That's somehow comforting to know. Luke found himself smiling despite everything. "You could burn water when we were kids." "I still can. It's a gift." She walked them to their truck, Maddie skipping ahead. "Thank you for coming today, and for agreeing to fix the tractor. It means more to me than you probably realize." "It's just a tractor repair, Em." "No," she said softly. "It's not. We both know it's not." They stood there in the cooling evening air, the weight of history and possibility hanging between them. Luke wanted to ask so many questions. Why did you really leave? Did you ever think about me? What would have happened if you'd stayed? But Maddie was already in the truck, and the moment wasn't right. And maybe it never would be. "I'll see you Saturday," he said instead. "Saturday," Emily confirmed. Then, just as he was opening his truck door, "Luke, I really am glad you came. Even if I had to break a tractor to make it happen. He looked back at her, caught the mischievous glint in her eye. Wait, are you saying? I'm saying nothing, except that sometimes things break at very convenient times. She was already walking backward toward the barn, grinning. Drive safe, Luke Harlan. And Maddie? Keep asking good questions. Luke drove home with Maddie's excited chatter washing over him, his mind replaying every moment of the day, every word and look and touch. By the time they pulled into their driveway, the streetlights were coming on, and his phone showed 4 missed calls from customers and a text from his landlord about the rent. Real life, waiting to remind him that some distances couldn't be crossed with just good intentions and old memories. But as he watched Maddie run into the house, already calling out the adventure to Mrs. Kowalski, who was watering her flowers next door, Luke couldn't quite make himself regret saying yes to dinner. Couldn't quite make himself wish he'd stayed away from Carter Agricultural Operations and the girl, no, the woman, who'd once held his heart. Maybe some broken things, he thought, were worth the effort of trying to repair. Even if the fix wasn't guaranteed to hold, the week that followed felt suspended somehow, like Luke was living in 2 timelines at once. There was the regular timeline, fixing Mrs. Henderson's truck, replacing the carburetor on Jimmy Walsh's ancient Ford, negotiating a payment plan with the auto parts supplier who was threatening to cut off his credit. And then there was the other timeline, the one that existed in the spaces between tasks, where his mind kept drifting back to dusty barns and brown eyes with gold flecks, and the sound of Maddie's laughter as Emily explained how precision agriculture worked. Tuesday afternoon, Luke was under a Subaru diagnosing a mysterious rattling sound when his phone buzzed. He almost ignored it. He'd learned the hard way that answering calls while wedged between an exhaust system and a transmission was a recipe for dropped phones and bruised knuckles. But something made him slide out and check the screen. Emily Carter. His heart did something stupid and complicated before he even swiped to answer. "Hey," he said, aware that his voice came out rougher than intended. "Hi, bad time?" Emily sounded slightly breathless, like she'd been running or was nervous or both. "Just diagnosing a car. What's up?" "The parts arrived early for the tractor." There was a pause, and Luke could hear wind in the background, the distant sound of machinery. "I know we said Saturday, but I was thinking, if you're not too busy, maybe you could come out Thursday. I have a board meeting Friday that's going to consume my entire day, and I'd really like to be around while you're working on it. To help, I mean, if you need help, or just to watch." That sounded less weird in my head. Luke found himself smiling despite the grease under his fingernails and the ache in his lower back. "You want to be my assistant mechanic?" "I used to be pretty good at it." He could hear the smile in her voice. "Besides, I ordered premium parts. The really expensive ones you said might not be necessary. I want to see if they were worth it." You didn't have to." "I wanted to. Consider it an investment in preserving agricultural history, or in assuaging my guilt for every meal I ate in this barn while we worked on that tractor the first time and never properly thanked you for teaching me everything I know about engines." She paused. "So Thursday? I can have lunch brought in. Maddie's welcome too, obviously. There's a visiting scientist here doing work on pollinator habitats. She might enjoy that." Luke glanced over at Maddie, who was supposed to be doing homework at the office desk, but was instead sketching what looked like an elaborate irrigation system design in her notebook. "Let me check with the boss." He covered the phone. "Maddie, want to go back to Emily's farm Thursday? She says there's a scientist there studying bees." Maddie's head snapped up so fast he worried about whiplash. "Yes, can I bring my bee book? The one from the library about native pollinators?" Luke uncovered the phone. "Looks like Thursday works for us." "Perfect. Same time? 8 o'clock? We'll be there." After they hung up, Luke lay back down on the creeper and rolled under the Subaru, but his concentration was shot. Thursday. 2 days away. He'd see her again in 2 days, and this time it wouldn't be the shock of an unexpected reunion. It would be deliberate, planned, something they'd both chosen. That night, after Maddie was in bed, Luke found himself pulling out an old box from the back of his closet. He'd packed away most reminders of Emily years ago, right after Sarah left, in a burst of determined forward motion that had felt like survival at the time. But he'd kept one box, shoved it behind winter coats and broken electronics he kept meaning to repair. Inside were layers of his past: concert ticket stubs from the summer after high school graduation, a dried corsage from junior prom, photos from before everything was documented on phones. Luke sorted through them with careful hands, like archaeological artifacts that might crumble if handled too roughly. There, them at 17, covered in grease, grinning at the camera with the John Deere in the background. Emily's father must have taken the photo. She had a smudge of oil across her cheek and her hair was falling out of its ponytail, and she was looking at Luke instead of the camera, caught mid-laugh at something he'd said. And another, the two of them at the reservoir, sitting on the tailgate of her dad's truck, her head on his shoulder, both of them watching something out of frame, probably the sunset, though the photo didn't show it. He remembered that day. It was late August, 3 weeks before she was supposed to leave for Stanford. They hadn't talked about the future, had spent the whole summer carefully avoiding any conversation that acknowledged the approaching end date. Instead, they'd talked about crop rotation and engine timing and whether you could see the International Space Station with binoculars. "You look sad, Dad." Luke's head jerked up. Maddie stood in his doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit, the one she claimed she didn't sleep with anymore but always ended up holding by morning. "Hey, kiddo, what are you doing up?" "Couldn't sleep. Are those pictures of you and Emily?" She patted closer, curious but cautious, always reading the room before committing to an emotion. "Yeah, long time ago. We were friends in high school." Maddie picked up the photo of them by the tractor, studying it with the intense focus she brought to everything. "You look really happy." "We were." The admission came out quiet. "We were best friends, and then we were more than that. And then she left for college and I stayed here, and sometimes that's just how life works." "Did you love her?" The question, delivered in Maddie's matter-of-fact 8-year-old way, hit him harder than it should have. "Yeah, kiddo, I did." "Do you still?" Luke looked at his daughter, this brilliant, perceptive person who saw too much and felt too deeply, who'd already learned that people left and love wasn't always enough to make them stay. "It's complicated. A lot of time has passed. We're different people now." "That's not really an answer, Dad." No, it wasn't. But it was the only one he had. "Come on," Luke said, closing the box and standing up. "Let's get you back to bed. Big day Thursday. You're going to meet a scientist and learn about bees." "And you're going to fix a tractor with someone you used to love," Maddie said, letting him guide her back to her room. "That seems more interesting than bees, honestly." Luke tucked her in, kissed her forehead. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart. You just notice it more when it's inconvenient." She yawned, already half asleep. "Dad, I like Emily. She's nice. And she thinks I'm smart too. Not just for a kid, but actually smart." "You are actually smart." "I know, but not everyone sees it." Her eyes drifted closed. "She sees it." Luke stood in the doorway for a long moment after Maddie fell asleep, watching the rise and fall of her breathing, feeling the weight of responsibility and love and fear that came with being a parent. Whatever happened between him and Emily, whatever old feelings were being resurrected or new complications were being created, he had to protect Maddie first. She'd already lost one parent to restlessness and broken promises. He couldn't let her get attached to someone who might disappear again, even if that someone was Emily Carter, especially if that someone was Emily Carter. Thursday morning arrived bright and cold, the kind of crisp November day that promised winter wasn't far behind. Luke had been up since 5, unable to sleep, finally giving up and going for a run through the quiet streets of Crawford while the sky turned from black to gray to pale blue. By the time Maddie woke up, he'd showered, made breakfast, packed his tools, and was working on his second cup of coffee while pretending to read the news on his phone. "You're nervous," Maddie announced, pouring herself cereal with the confidence of someone who'd been doing it herself since she was 6. "I'm not nervous. I'm caffeinated." "You're both. You get this look when you're nervous. Your jaw does a thing." She demonstrated, making an exaggerated clenching motion that Luke had to admit looked somewhat accurate. "My jaw does not do a thing." "It totally does. You did it before my parent-teacher conference, too. And before we went to Grandma's for Thanksgiving last year, when you knew she was going to ask about Sarah again." Maddie took a bite of cereal, assessed him with those two knowing eyes. "It's It's okay to be nervous about seeing Emily. She's really pretty and nice and successful, and you're just a mechanic with a kid and not a lot of money. Jesus, Maddie, said. Luke set down his coffee. Is that really how you think I see myself? She shrugged, but something vulnerable flickered across her face. It's how Mom saw you. She said it enough times before she left, that you'd never amount to anything stuck in this town, fixing other people's broken things. The anger that flared in Luke's chest wasn't at his daughter. It was at Sarah, who'd apparently shared her resentments with a 4-year-old, planting seeds of doubt that had been growing quietly for years. He knelt down next to Maddie's chair, waited until she looked at him. Listen to me. Your mother was unhappy, and unhappy people sometimes say unfair things, but I need you to know this. Being a mechanic isn't something I settled for. It's what I'm good at, what I choose to do. I fix things that are broken because most things worth having are worth fixing. And this town? It's not a trap. It's home. He paused, made sure she was really hearing him. There's nothing wrong with staying somewhere you love. There's nothing wrong with choosing the life you want instead of the life other people think you should want. But Emily chose to leave, Maddie said softly. And she's really successful now. So maybe Mom was right. Maybe leaving is what smart people do. Luke felt something crack in his chest. This was what he'd been afraid of. That reconnecting with Emily would make Maddie question everything she knew, would make her see her father as someone who'd failed to launch, instead of someone who'd chosen his path deliberately. Emily left because she had dreams that required leaving, Luke said carefully. And I stayed because my dreams were here. Neither choice was wrong, they were just different. He stood, ruffled Maddie's hair. And for the record, I didn't stay stuck. I stayed rooted. There's a difference. Maddie considered this, slowly eating her cereal. Finally, she said, I like being rooted. I like our house, and our town, and my school. I don't want to leave. Then we won't, not unless we both want to. Luke checked his watch. Now, finish up. We need to hit the road in 15 minutes, and you still need to brush your teeth. The drive to Carter Agricultural Operations felt different this time. Luke knew what to expect. The sleek entrance, the solar panels, the impossible blend of past and future that Emily had created. What he wasn't prepared for was the way his pulse kicked up when they rounded the last curve and the farm came into view, or the way he caught himself checking his reflection in the rearview mirror, or the way Maddie grinned at him knowingly when she noticed. Your jaw's doing the thing again, she said. Traitor. Emily was waiting outside the main barn, and Luke's first thought was that she looked like she belonged there. Not like someone who'd returned to her roots reluctantly, but like someone who'd found exactly where she was meant to be. She wore jeans and a canvas work jacket, her hair loose around her shoulders, and when she smiled at their approaching truck, Luke felt 15 years collapse into nothing. You made it! Emily jogged over as they parked, her breath visible in the cold air. Perfect timing. Dr. Reeves, the pollinator researcher, just set up her observation station in the north field. Maddie, she's expecting you. Maddie was out of the truck before Luke could even turn off the engine, backpack in hand practically vibrating with excitement. Did you know that native bee species are actually more efficient pollinators than honeybees for certain crops? And that agricultural diversity can increase pollinator populations by up to 300%? Emily laughed, delighted. I did know that actually, but I love that you know it too. Come on, I'll introduce you to Dr. Reeves. She's going to love you. She glanced back at Luke. The tractor's ready when you are. I'll be back in 10 minutes to help. Luke watched them walk away together, Maddie gesturing enthusiastically, while Emily listened with genuine interest, asking questions that made Maddie's explanations grow more animated. It should have worried him, this easy connection forming between his daughter and a woman who'd already left once. Instead, he felt something else. Something like hope, maybe. Or the dangerous belief that some things were meant to find their way back to each other. The barn was exactly as he remembered from Saturday, but quieter now, empty except for the tractor waiting in the center like a patient in surgery. Luke set down his tool bag and walked a slow circle around the machine, mentally organizing the repair sequence. Engine block first. That was the critical piece. If the welding didn't hold, nothing else mattered. He was laying out his tools when Emily returned, slightly breathless, her cheeks pink from the cold. Dr. Reeves is going to keep Maddie occupied for hours. That kid asks better questions than most of my graduate interns. She grabbed a second set of work gloves from the tool station. So, where do we start? You really want to help with this? Luke, I helped you tear apart this entire tractor when I was 17 and had no idea what I was doing. I think I can manage to hand you wrenches and hold flashlights now that I'm 33 and technically run an agricultural technology company. She pulled on the gloves, raised an eyebrow. Unless you don't trust me near your work. It's not that. I just figured you'd have better things to do. There's literally nothing I'd rather do than spend a day working on this tractor with you. The words came out simply, honestly, and Luke saw the truth of them in her eyes. I've missed this. The hands-on work. Everything in my life now is meetings and projections and strategic planning. I make decisions about farming from climate-controlled offices using data analytics. But this? She touched the tractor's hood gently. This is real. This is the part I loved. Something shifted in Luke's understanding then. He'd been thinking of Emily as someone who'd left the farm behind, who'd transcended this life for something bigger and better. But looking at her now, he realized she'd never left at all. She'd just found a different way to stay connected to the land and the work that had shaped her. Okay then, he said, handing her a wrench. Let's fix this thing. They fell into a rhythm that felt both familiar and new, their movements synchronized in the way they'd once been, but informed now by years of separate experience. Luke had developed his own systematic approach to repairs, methodical and thorough, while Emily brought an engineer's perspective, understanding not just how things worked, but why, able to troubleshoot based on first principles. So tell me about Maddie's mom, Emily said after they'd been working in comfortable silence for 20 minutes. She was holding a work light steady while Luke disconnected fuel lines. If that's not too personal, Luke considered deflecting, keeping the wall up between past and present. But something about the quiet barn and the familiar work made honesty feel possible. Her name's Sarah. We met about 3 years after you left. She'd just moved to Crawford, was working at the coffee shop while she figured out what to do with a psychology degree from a small liberal arts college. We dated for 6 months, got married too fast, had Maddie a year later. And then reality set in. Sarah hated small-town life, hated the gossip and the limitations and the feeling that everyone knew everyone's business. She wanted adventure, excitement, the kind of life you see in movies. He paused, tightened a connection. I wanted what we had, a family, a home, work that mattered, simple things. Those aren't simple things, Emily said quietly. Those are everything. Not to Sarah. When Maddie was 4, she met this guy at a pharmacy conference in Denver. Sales rep, traveled constantly, expensive suits, talked a lot about possibilities and new chapters. She told me she felt like she was suffocating here, that staying would kill her. Luke set down his wrench, wiped his hands. So I let her go. Told her Maddie and I would be fine, that she should do what she needed to do to be happy. That must have been impossible. The impossible part was explaining to a 4-year-old why Mommy wasn't coming home, why she chose a new life over us. He picked up the wrench again, needed something to do with his hands. Maddie still asks sometimes if it was her fault. If she'd been better or quieter or smarter, would her mom have stayed? Jesus, Luke. Yeah. He tested the fuel line connection, satisfied it would hold. So now you know why I'm cautious. Maddie's been left once by someone who was supposed to love her unconditionally. I can't let her get attached to someone who might... He stopped, but the unfinished sentence hung in the air anyway. Someone who might leave again. Emily set down the work light carefully, turned to face him fully. Is that what you think? That I'm going to leave again? I don't know what to think. 15 years ago, you left without looking back. Built this incredible life, this empire. And now I'm supposed to believe that you want... What? To reconnect with your high school boyfriend? To be friends? He ran a hand through his hair, frustration bleeding into his voice. I don't even know what this is, Em. Do you? No, she admitted. I don't know what this is. But I know what it isn't. It isn't me using you or playing with your feelings or risking your daughter's emotional safety on a whim. She stepped closer, her voice steady and sure. And I think we need to talk about what actually happened 15 years ago. Because the story you're telling yourself about me leaving without looking back, it's not the whole truth. Luke's heart was pounding. Then tell me the whole truth. Before Emily could answer, a voice called out from the barn entrance. Ms. Carter? Sorry to interrupt, but you have a call from the board. They say it's urgent. Emily closed her eyes briefly, frustration flickering across her face. Of course they do. She looked at Luke, and there was something almost desperate in her expression. Don't leave, please. We need to finish this conversation. I'm not going anywhere. I've got a tractor to repair, remember? Right. The tractor. She pulled off her gloves, started toward the door, then turned back. Luke? That summer we spent working on this tractor? It was the best summer of my life, too. I need you to know that. Then she was gone, jogging toward the main office building, and Luke was alone with the tractor and his racing thoughts, and the growing suspicion that he'd been carrying an incomplete story for 15 years, filling in the blanks with his own hurt and assumptions. He worked steadily through the morning, replacing fuel injectors, rewiring electrical connections, methodically checking every system. The engine block was the challenge. The crack was worse than he'd initially assessed, and the previous repair attempt had actually made it worse, introducing stress fractures that spider-webbed out from the original damage. Luke was deep in concentration, using a specialized epoxy to prepare the surface for welding, when he sensed someone watching. He looked up to find Maddie standing just inside the barn, her face flushed with excitement. Dad, you have to see what Dr. Reeves showed me. There are these bees called mason bees, and they make their nests in hollow stems, and they're so much better at pollinating fruit trees than regular bees, and Dr. Reeves says that with climate change, native pollinators are going to become even more important for food security, and... She stopped, took a breath. Can we have mason bees at home? We could build a habitat. I already looked it up on Dr. Reeves's tablet. It's super easy. Luke couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. Sure, kiddo, we can build a mason bee habitat, though I'm not sure our landlord will appreciate us turning the backyard into a pollinator sanctuary. Speaking of which, Emily's voice came from behind Maddie. She'd returned without Luke noticing, and she looked tired now. The light that had been in her eyes earlier dimmed slightly. Sorry that took so long. Board members who've never set foot on a farm love to tell me how to run one. She shook off whatever was bothering her, focused on Maddie. Your dad says you can build a bee habitat? He said yes. Maddie bounced on her toes. Can I show him the photos Dr. Reeves took of the native bee species she's cataloging? Absolutely. My tablet's in the office. Why don't you go grab it? I need to talk to your dad about the tractor repair for a minute. Maddie ran off, and Emily waited until her footsteps faded before speaking. That phone call? My board wants me in San Francisco next week for investor meetings. 3 days of presentations and networking and convincing people with too much money that sustainable agriculture can generate returns. She leaned against the workbench, arms crossed. I hate that part of my job, the performance of it. Acting like farming is just another tech startup that can be optimized and scaled and sold for profit. But that's what you built, Luke said, not unkindly. Carter Agritech is a tech startup. It's more than that. It started as a way to save family farms, to use technology to solve real problems for real people. But somewhere along the way, it became about shareholder value and market penetration and board approval. She looked at the tractor, something wistful crossing her face. Sometimes I miss when the biggest problem I had to solve was a seized bolt, and the only person I had to answer to was myself. Luke set down the epoxy applicator, gave her his full attention. So why do you do it? If you hate it so much? Because the work matters. Because small farms are disappearing at a terrifying rate. And if technology can help them survive, then I need to do this. Even the parts I hate. She met his eyes. But it costs something. Every decision, every compromise, every board meeting where I have to defend choices that should be obvious, it all costs something. What did it cost you today? Emily hesitated, then sighed. They're questioning my judgment. Specifically, they're questioning whether personal relationships might be influencing my business decisions. It took Luke a moment to understand. They're questioning you hiring me. Not just hiring you, insisting on preserving this tractor when replacing it would be more cost-effective. Spending time on the farm instead of at our San Francisco headquarters. They're not saying it directly yet, But the implication is clear. They think I'm letting nostalgia or emotion cloud my business sense. Maybe they're right. The words came out harsher than Luke intended. Maybe keeping a 37-year-old tractor running isn't sound business. Maybe I shouldn't be here. Stop! Emily's voice was sharp. Don't do that. Don't let them make you feel like you're some kind of liability or mistake. You're the best mechanic I could have hired for this job. The fact that we have history doesn't change your qualifications. But it changes how your board sees it, how everyone will see it if... Luke caught himself, but too late. If what? Emily pushed off from the workbench, took a step closer. If we're seen together? If people find out we used to date? If this becomes something more than just a business transaction? The air in the barn felt charged suddenly, heavy with things unsaid. Luke's hands were steady even though his pulse wasn't, and he made himself hold Emily's gaze. Is that what you want? He asked quietly. For this to become something more? I don't know. Emily's honesty was almost worse than uncertainty. I know that seeing you again made me realize how much I've missed having someone in my life who knew me before I became this person. Someone who sees me as M instead of Emily Carter, CEO. Someone who doesn't want anything from me except... She stopped, laughed softly without much humor. Except I don't even know what you want. Maybe you don't want anything. Maybe I'm reading this all wrong. Before Luke could answer, before he could even figure out what his answer would be, Maddie came running back, Emily's tablet clutched in both hands, her voice carrying across the barn. Dad, look at this one. It's called a leafcutter bee, and it literally cuts pieces of leaves to build its nest. Isn't that amazing? The moment broke, and Emily stepped back, professional mask sliding into place. They spent the next hour looking at bee photos and eating the lunch Emily had ordered from some farm-to-table restaurant in Gering, sandwiches with ingredients Luke couldn't even pronounce but that tasted incredible, while Maddie monopolized the conversation with pollinator facts and Dr. Reeves's theories about habitat restoration. Luke watched Emily with his daughter, saw how patient she was with the endless questions, how she never talked down to Maddie or dismissed her enthusiasm. And he felt something dangerous taking root in his chest, something that felt like possibility and terror in equal measure. When they returned to work on the tractor, the easy rhythm from the morning didn't quite return. They were both too aware now of the conversation they'd almost had, the questions they'd almost answered. But they worked efficiently, Luke's certainty about the repair growing as each system came back online. By 4 o'clock, they were ready to test the engine. Luke had spent 2 hours on the block repair, using techniques he'd learned from years of coaxing life out of machines that should have been retired long ago. The welding would need to cure overnight, but he could at least check if the engine would turn over. Moment of truth, Luke said, checking connections one final time. You want to do the honors? Emily climbed into the driver's seat, the same seat she'd sat in 15 years ago when they'd first successfully started the restored engine, her shriek of joy echoing off the barn walls. She looked at Luke, something hopeful and nervous in her expression. Together? She said. Like before? Luke climbed up to stand beside her, one hand braced on the roll bar, the other reaching to help turn the key. Their fingers touched, and neither of them pulled away. Emily turned the key, and for a breath, nothing happened. Then the engine coughed once, twice, caught, and roared to life. The sound was beautiful, rough and powerful and alive. The exact tone Luke had been working toward. Emily let out a whoop of triumph, and without thinking, Luke pulled her into a hug, both of them laughing and covered in grease and probably breathing in diesel fumes, and for that moment, everything else fell away. When they pulled apart, breathless and grinning, Luke realized Maddie was standing in the barn doorway, watching them with an expression he couldn't quite read. It works, Emily called to her. Your dad fixed it. I can see that, Maddie said, and there was something careful in her voice that made Luke's chest tighten. They let the engine run for 15 minutes, checking for leaks or unusual sounds, and when Luke finally shut it down, he felt the satisfaction that always came with a successful repair. But underneath it was something else, a growing awareness that he'd crossed some line today, that the careful boundaries he'd been trying to maintain had blurred irreversibly. As they cleaned up and prepared to leave, Emily walked them to the truck, her hand briefly touching Luke's arm. Thank you for everything. The tractor sounds perfect. It needs to cure for 24 hours, and I want to test it under load before you use it in the field. But yeah, it should be fine. Professional words, but his voice came out too soft. Luke? Emily waited until he looked at her. The conversation we started earlier? About what actually happened 15 years ago? Can we finish it? Not today. I know it's late and Maddie's tired, but soon? I'm not sure. Please. You've been carrying a story about me leaving that isn't complete, and I've been carrying guilt for 15 years that maybe doesn't belong entirely to me. We owe each other the full truth. She glanced at Maddie, who was already buckled into the truck, deliberately looking anywhere but at them. And I think we owe it to her too, because she's scared right now that history is repeating, and she deserves to know the real history before she decides what it means. Luke wanted to argue, wanted to say they should just leave the past buried, but he'd seen the careful expression on Maddie's face, the way she was protecting herself from disappointment. Okay, Saturday, still? The dinner you mentioned. Saturday, 6 o'clock. And Luke? Bring an appetite. I'm having my assistant hire an actual chef because I refuse to poison you with my cooking. He laughed despite everything, and Emily's answering smile was warm enough to carry him through the drive home, through Maddie's pointed silence, through the evening stretching ahead with its unanswered questions and terrifying possibilities. Saturday felt simultaneously too far away and not nearly far enough. Friday arrived with the kind of gray sky that promised snow, and Luke spent most of the day trying not to think about tomorrow's dinner while simultaneously thinking about nothing else. He was replacing brake pads on a Honda when his phone rang, Emily's name flashing on the screen for the third time that week. "Don't tell me the tractor's acting up already," he said by way of greeting. "The tractor's perfect." Emily's voice was tight, stressed in a way he hadn't heard before. "Luke, I need to ask you something, and I need you to say no if it's too much." Every protective instinct Luke had developed over 4 years of single parenting went on high alert. "What's wrong?" "There's a massive storm system moving in. Should hit late tonight, early tomorrow. My meteorologist is tracking it, and it's going to be bad. High winds, heavy rain, possibly hail. The problem is Field 7, where the heritage wheat is. We just planted the parent stock 3 days ago, and if this storm hits with the intensity they're predicting, we could lose everything." Luke straightened from under the Honda, his mind already working through the implications. "You need to harvest early." "We need to harvest now, today. But our main harvester is down for scheduled maintenance, and the backup has a software glitch that our techs can't resolve remotely. The manufacturer can't get someone here until Monday." She took a breath, and Luke could hear the controlled panic underneath. "I know this is insane, and I know you have a business to run, but you're the only person I know who understands both the old mechanical systems and enough about modern farm equipment to maybe figure out a workaround. Luke, this wheat represents 40 years of my grandfather's work. It's irreplaceable." Luke looked at the Honda, at the 2 other cars waiting in his bay, at the schedule Maddie had written on the whiteboard showing appointments through next Wednesday. Then he looked at his daughter, who was watching him with those 2 knowing eyes, already understanding what he was going to say. "I'll be there in an hour. Let me make some calls, reschedule what I can." "Thank you. God, thank you. I'll have my team pull all the technical specs, and I'm calling in every favor I have to get parts rushed if we need them." She paused. "Luke, I know this is above and beyond. Whatever you want to charge, we'll figure it out later. Just have coffee ready. It's going to be a long night." After he hung up, Maddie set down the homework she'd been ignoring and came to stand next to him. "You're going to help her?" "Yeah, kiddo, I am." "Because you still love her, or because it's the right thing to do?" The question, delivered in Maddie's serious way, deserved a serious answer. Luke crouched down to her eye level. "Both, maybe. I don't know yet, but I know that someone I care about is about to lose something that matters, and I have skills that might prevent that. So yeah, I'm going to help." Maddie studied him for a long moment. "Can I come?" "It's going to be boring. Lots of technical work, probably lots of frustrated adults. Definitely no bee scientists or fancy lunches." "I know, but you're going to be there all night, right? And Mrs. Kowalski has her book club Friday nights, so I'd just be home alone anyway. Plus," she shrugged, trying for casual and not quite making it. "Plus, I want to make sure you're okay." Luke felt something crack in his chest at his 8-year-old daughter trying to take care of him. All right, grab your backpack, bring homework and your tablet. But Maddie, if I say you need to stay out of the way, you stay out of the way. This is serious farm equipment, not a field trip. I know, Dad. I'll be good. They made the drive in near silence, Luke's mind already running through diagnostic protocols for harvest equipment, while Maddie stared out the window at the darkening sky. The wind was picking up, making the truck shudder occasionally, and Luke could see the storm building on the horizon, a wall of black clouds that looked angry and determined. The farm was organized chaos when they arrived. Emily stood in the center of it all, directing her team with calm efficiency, even though Luke could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands clenched and unclenched when she thought no one was looking. She was on a headset, talking to someone about field conditions, while simultaneously checking a tablet showing weather radar. When she saw Luke's truck, relief flooded her face. She said something into the headset, then jogged over, her ponytail whipping in the wind. The harvester's in the equipment barn, east side. I've got Marcus and 2 of our best techs standing by. Whatever you need, just ask. She glanced at Maddie. Hi, sweetheart. Your dad's about to save my entire operation. Think you can handle being around a bunch of stressed farm workers? I brought homework and headphones. I'm good at being invisible when adults need to focus. Maddie delivered this with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who'd spent plenty of time in her dad's shop during crisis repairs. You could never be invisible, Emily said, but she was already walking them toward the equipment barn with that determined stride. Okay, here's what we're dealing with. The harvester is a Case IH combine, brand new, supposed to be the most advanced system on the market. Cost me $800,000 and has more computing power than my first college dorm. Problem is, the GPS guidance system is glitching. It thinks it's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, which means it won't engage the automatic steering or the yield monitoring or half a dozen other systems that make it worth $800,000. They entered the equipment barn, and Luke let out a low whistle. The combine was massive, gleaming red and silver, all modern angles and sensors, more like a spaceship than farm equipment. A team of 3 people huddled around an open panel, one of them on a laptop, all of them looking frustrated. Tell me you've tried a hard reset, Luke said, setting down his tool bag. Twice. Also rebooted the GPS module, checked all cable connections, and ran full diagnostics. No hardware faults showing, but the GPS keeps insisting we're at latitude 23.5 north, longitude 158 west. Marcus, a compact guy in his 30s with grease-stained Carhartt overalls, looked up from the laptop. That's Hawaii, by the way. We are definitely not in Hawaii. Luke climbed up into the cab, started examining the control systems. The harvester was intimidating in its complexity. Multiple screens, hundreds of input sensors, everything networked and integrated in ways that made his old-school mechanical training seem quaint. But underneath all the technology, it was still just a machine with mechanical systems that could break and electrical connections that could fail. Show me the GPS antenna, Luke said, and Marcus led him to the roof of the combine where a sophisticated antenna array sat behind protective housing. Luke examined it carefully, checking connections, looking for any signs of damage or interference. Everything looked fine, which was somehow worse than finding an obvious problem. He climbed back down, thinking hard. Emily, what's changed in the last week? New equipment installed, software updates, anything? Emily consulted her tablet. We installed weather stations in 3 fields, upgraded the irrigation control system, and brought in Dr. Reeves's bee monitoring stations. She stopped, her eyes widening. The bee stations. They have short-range radio transmitters to communicate with the data collection server. We installed one about 50 yards from this barn. Luke and Marcus looked at each other, the same thought clearly occurring to both. RF interference, Marcus said. If the frequency is close enough to the GPS band, it could swamp the receiver, Luke finished, making it pick up garbage data instead of satellite signals. Can we shut down the bee station temporarily? Already texting Dr. Reeves, Emily's fingers flew across her phone screen. She can power it down remotely. Give it a minute. They waited, the wind howling outside the barn, everyone hyper-aware of the minutes ticking away before the storm hit. Luke found himself watching Emily. The way she stood with her weight slightly forward, ready to move, ready to act, the way she'd chew her bottom lip when she was thinking, the way she'd unconsciously reached out to touch the combine like she could will it to work through sheer determination. "Okay, station's down," Emily said. "Try it now." Marcus hit a few keys on his laptop, and they all watched the GPS coordinates on the combine's display. For a breath, nothing happened. Then the numbers started changing, scrolling rapidly through latitude and longitude until finally they settled on coordinates that actually placed them in Nebraska. "We're back!" Marcus pumped his fist. "GPS is locked, all systems showing green. We're good to go." The relief in the barn was palpable, but Emily was already moving into the next phase. "Okay, people, let's not celebrate yet. We've got maybe 4 hours before the storm hits, and we need to harvest 23 acres of wheat before then. Marcus, you drive the combine. Teresa, you're on the grain cart. I need everyone else coordinating the trucks for transport." She looked at Luke. "Thank you. Seriously, I don't know how you—" It was Marcus who figured it out. "I just asked the right question." Luke watched the team mobilizing, efficient and practiced, everyone knowing their role. "What do you need me to do?" Emily hesitated, and he could see her weighing options. "Honestly, I need you to be my backup. If anything goes wrong with any piece of equipment, you're the fastest diagnostic mind I've got, which means you need to be mobile. Take one of the ATVs, stay on the perimeter road, keep your radio on channel 7. If something breaks, I need you there immediately." "Done. Maddie can stay." "Maddie stays with me in the command center," Emily said firmly. "I'm going to be monitoring from the main office, coordinating everything. She'll be warm and safe and probably bored out of her mind watching weather radar, but that's better than sitting in a barn or following you around on an ATV in this wind." Luke looked at his daughter, who nodded seriously. "I'll be okay, Dad. Go do your thing." The next 4 hours were some of the most intense of Luke's life. He raced from one crisis to another on a battered ATV that handled like it had a death wish, his radio constantly crackling with updates and emergencies. A grain cart got a flat tire in the middle of the field. Luke swapped it in 8 minutes flat, while Marcus kept the combine running. The combine's engine started overheating because debris clogged the radiator intake. Luke cleared it while standing on the engine housing, wind trying to throw him off, the first drops of rain starting to fall. Through it all, Emily's voice on the radio kept everyone coordinated, kept the operation moving. She was calm even when things went wrong, decisive even when faced with impossible choices, and Luke found himself remembering why he'd fallen for her in the first place, not because she was beautiful or familiar, but because she was capable in a way that made you believe anything was possible. By the time the storm hit in earnest, they'd harvested 19 of the 23 acres. The last 4 were going to be close. "Marcus, how's it looking?" Emily's voice crackled through the radio. 3 more passes and we're done. But Luke, I'm getting weird vibration in the header. Not critical yet, but it's getting worse." Luke, who was already racing toward the field, keyed his radio. "I'm 2 minutes out. Keep going, I'll check it when you turn." The rain was coming down in sheets now, visibility reduced to almost nothing, and the ATV kept sliding in the mud. Luke pushed it harder, knowing that if the header failed, the part that actually cut and collected the wheat, the entire harvest was done. They'd lose the last 4 acres and probably damage what they'd already collected if they couldn't transport it before the storm got worse. He reached the field just as Marcus was completing a pass. The combine was a blurry red shape in the rain, its lights cutting through the darkness. Luke jumped off the ATV before it fully stopped, running to meet the combine as Marcus slowed. "Show me!" Luke shouted over the wind. Marcus pointed to the header drive shaft, and Luke could see the problem immediately. A bearing was failing, causing the shaft to wobble. It would seize completely within minutes if they kept running it. "I need to replace the bearing," Luke yelled. "Shut it down." "We don't have time. The storm... If this shaft seizes, we don't get anything. Shut it down." Marcus killed the engine, and sudden silence fell except for the roar of wind and rain. Luke scrambled underneath the header, his emergency toolkit in hand, working by feel as much as sight. The bearing was held in place by a retaining clip and 2 bolts, and his hands were shaking from cold and adrenaline as he worked to remove them. His radio crackled. "Luke, what's your status?" Emily's voice tight with worry. Replacing a bearing. Give me 10 minutes. The radar shows hail moving in. You've got maybe 8. Luke worked faster, his fingers screaming in protest, the rain making everything slippery. He dropped the retaining clip twice before finally getting it secured, cross-threaded a bolt, and had to back it out and start over. But finally, the new bearing was seated and locked in place. Marcus, fire it up! The combine roared back to life, the header spinning smoothly now, no vibration. Marcus gave him a thumbs up and got back to work. And Luke collapsed against the ATV, soaked to the bone, his hands cramping, watching the combine make its final passes. They finished with 4 minutes to spare. The first hailstones were just starting to fall, pinging off the combine's metal housing like bullets, when Marcus drove the last load toward the grain storage facility. Luke followed on the ATV, barely able to see through the rain and darkness, trusting muscle memory to keep him on the road. By the time he made it back to the equipment barn, the hail was falling in earnest, ice chunks the size of golf balls that would have shredded the unharvested wheat in minutes. The team was celebrating in the barn, cheering and hugging, relief and triumph mixing together in the warm, dry space. Luke stood in the doorway, dripping and exhausted, and watched Emily in the center of it all, thanking each person individually, her face shining with gratitude and accomplishment. Then she looked up, saw him standing there, and the expression that crossed her face made his heart stop. She crossed the barn in 3 strides and threw her arms around him, not caring that he was soaked and muddy and probably smelled like diesel and rain. You did it. You saved it. All of it. Luke wrapped his arms around her, feeling her shake slightly. Adrenaline crash or relief, or maybe both. We did it. Your team, Marcus, everyone. You. Emily pulled back just enough to look at him, her hands still gripping his arms. When everyone else said it was impossible, when the manufacturers said wait until Monday, when every rational person would have given up, you found a way, just like you always do. They were standing too close, everyone in the barn watching them but pretending not to, and Luke knew he should step back, should maintain the professional boundary he'd been trying to preserve. Instead, he found himself saying, I need to get Maddie, and find some dry clothes before I freeze to death. Right, yes. Emily stepped back, seemed to remember where they were. Maddie's in my office. I had my assistant bring her dinner, and she's been tracking the storm like a junior meteorologist. Emily paused, something flickering across her face. She's pretty amazing, Luke. You should be proud. I am, every day. They walked to the main office together, and Luke could feel the weight of the team's eyes following them, could almost hear the conversations that would happen as soon as they left. The mechanic and the billionaire working together in a storm, the way she'd hugged him like he was the only person in the world who mattered. Yeah, people were definitely going to talk. Maddie was indeed in Emily's office, surrounded by tablets and weather displays and what looked like the remnants of a very nice dinner. She looked up when they entered, took in Luke's bedraggled appearance, and grinned. You look like a drowned rat, Dad. Thanks, kiddo. You having fun playing meteorologist? So much fun. Did you know that hail forms when updrafts and thunderstorms carry raindrops up into extremely cold areas of the atmosphere where they freeze? And the bigger the hailstone, the more times it's been cycled through the updraft? She gestured at one of the displays showing radar data. This storm has updrafts of like 60 miles per hour. That's insane. Emily laughed, moving to her desk to check messages. Your daughter has been educating my entire staff about storm dynamics. I think she knows more about severe weather than our actual meteorologist now. That's what happens when you let her near experts and internet access. Luke was trying to figure out the polite way to ask if he could borrow a towel when Emily's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, and Luke watched her entire body tense. I have to take this. It's my board chair. She looked at Luke apologetically. The bathroom's through that door. There are clean clothes in the closet. My ex-husband left some stuff here that should fit you. Help yourself to anything. She answered the phone. As she walked into an adjoining conference room, her voice immediately shifting to something more formal. Donald, hi. Yes, we got the harvest in. Complete success despite the storm. No, I'm aware of the time difference. I know it's late in San Francisco. Luke ushered Maddie into the bathroom, where he toweled off and changed into clothes that were definitely too expensive for his comfort. Designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than his monthly rent. He caught sight of himself in the mirror and almost laughed. He looked ridiculous, like he was playing dress-up in someone else's life. When they emerged, Emily was still on the phone, but her body language had changed. She was gripping the edge of the conference table, her voice sharp in a way Luke had never heard. That's not what this is about. And you know it. Luke Harlan is a qualified mechanic who solved a problem your precious manufacturer couldn't. The personal history is irrelevant. Luke's stomach dropped. Maddie looked up at him, worried, and he put a hand on her shoulder, listening despite knowing he shouldn't. I don't care what it looks like to investors, Emily said, her voice rising slightly. I run this company based on what's best for the farm and the technology, not based on managing optics for people who've never gotten dirt under their fingernails. If the board has concerns about my judgment, then maybe the board needs to remember who built this company from nothing while they were all safely invested in index funds. There was a long pause while Emily listened to whatever response came through the phone. Luke could see her shoulders rising and falling with controlled breathing, could see the effort it took to keep her voice level when she spoke again. I understand the stakes, Donald. I'm the one who negotiated the Series C funding. I'm the one who promised investors a return. But I'm also the one who actually understands farming, and I will not compromise the integrity of this operation to make board meetings more comfortable. Another pause. Yes, we'll discuss it Monday when I'm in San Francisco. Goodbye. She ended the call and stood there for a moment, her back to them, her hands flat on the conference table like she needed to anchor herself to something solid. Then she straightened, turned, and saw Luke and Maddie standing in her office. The flash of vulnerability on her face was quickly replaced by a tired smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Sorry about that. Board politics, nothing you need to worry about. Luke started, but she shook her head. Not now. Please, it's been a really long day, and I just want to... She looked at Maddie, seemed to gather herself. I want to thank you both for everything you did today. Luke, I'm going to pay you triple your normal rate for this, and I don't want to hear any arguments. That's not necessary. It absolutely is. You dropped everything, worked in a storm, saved 40 years of irreplaceable genetic material. If anything, triple isn't enough. She moved to her desk, started gathering files and tablets, clearly preparing to send them home. But it's late, and you're both exhausted, and this storm isn't going to let up for hours. The roads are going to be terrible. Luke pulled out his phone, checked the weather radar. She was right. The storm was massive, and the roads between here and Crawford would be dangerous in the dark with this much rain and hail. But the alternative, staying here, felt loaded with complications he wasn't sure either of them was ready for. We'll be careful, he said. Come on, Maddie, let's get your stuff packed up. Or you could stay. Emily said it quietly, like she was afraid the words would spook him. I have guest rooms, well-stocked kitchen, safety. The roads are legitimately dangerous right now, Luke, and She trailed off, then seemed to make a decision. I don't want you driving in this. Please, just stay. We can have the conversation we keep almost having, or we can avoid each other in separate wings of the house, whatever you're comfortable with. But please don't drive home in this weather. Maddie was looking at Luke with those too perceptive eyes, and he knew whatever he decided right now would mean something to her. If he insisted on leaving, she'd see it as him running away from Emily. If he stayed, she'd see it as... what? Acceptance? Hope? The beginning of something that might break her heart if it fell apart? Okay, Luke heard himself say. We'll stay, but just tonight, and Maddie gets her own room. Obviously. Emily's relief was visible. Come on, I'll show you to the guest wing. Fair warning, my interior designer went a little overboard. Everything's very minimalist and modern, and honestly kind of uncomfortable. I keep meaning to redecorate with actual personality, but I'm never here long enough to care. She led them through the main house, which was indeed aggressively modern, all clean lines and neutral colors and furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum rather than a home where people actually lived. Maddie whispered, "This is fancy," in an odd voice that made Emily laugh. Fancy is one word for it, sterile is another. My ex-husband hired the decorator. He had very specific ideas about what a successful person's home should look like. She opened a door to reveal a guest room that could have been in a boutique hotel. Enormous bed, expensive linens, floor-to-ceiling windows showing the storm raging outside. Maddie, you're in here. Bathroom's through that door, and there should be everything you need in the closet. She showed Luke to an identical room 3 doors down, then stood in the hallway looking uncertain for the first time since he'd arrived. I should probably go coordinate post-storm assessment, make sure nothing got damaged. There's food in the kitchen if you're hungry. Just make yourselves at home, or as at home as you can in a house that looks like a Scandinavian furniture showroom. Wait. Luke stepped into the hallway, lowering his voice so Maddie wouldn't hear. That phone call. Your board chairman. Are you in trouble because of me? Emily's expression flickered. Frustration, exhaustion, something that might have been fear. The board has concerns about my priorities. They think I'm too emotionally invested in the farm and not invested enough in the company's growth trajectory. Hiring you, insisting on preserving the vintage equipment, spending time on the actual farm instead of in boardrooms, they see it as a pattern of poor judgment. She met his eyes. They're not entirely wrong. I am emotionally invested. This is my family's land, my grandfather's legacy, the place where I learned everything that matters. But to them, it's just an asset to be optimized. So what happens now? Now I go to San Francisco on Monday and convince a room full of investors that I haven't lost my mind, that sustainable farming and preservation of heritage crops and actual human relationships are compatible with profit margins and shareholder value. She smiled, but it was bitter around the edges. Should be fun. Will they try to push you out? They could. I still own controlling interest, but these days that matters less than you'd think. If they lose confidence, if they pull their support, the whole thing could collapse. She shrugged, trying for casual and not quite making it. But I've been in tight spots before. I'll figure it out. Luke wanted to say something reassuring, wanted to tell her it would be okay, but he'd learned years ago that empty promises helped no one. Instead, he said, "Thank you for letting us stay tonight, for trusting me today, for..." He stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. For what? For being exactly who you are, even when it's complicated. Emily's eyes shimmered with something that might have been tears, but she blinked them back. Get some sleep, Luke. Tomorrow we finish that conversation we keep starting. No more interruptions, no more emergencies. Just truth, even if it's hard. Even if it's hard, Luke agreed. He watched her walk away down the hallway, her footsteps echoing in the too empty house, and felt the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on his chest. Then he went to check on Maddie, who was already in pajamas and brushing her teeth with a toothbrush that still had the package on it. This house is weird, Dad, she said around a mouthful of toothpaste. It's like nobody actually lives here. Yeah, I noticed that too. Do you think Emily's lonely, living in this big house all by herself with furniture she doesn't even like? Luke thought about the board meetings and investor presentations, the constant pressure to perform and prove and protect what she'd built. Thought about coming home to this empty showcase house with its perfect lines and total lack of warmth. Yeah, kiddo, I think maybe she is. Maddie rinsed her mouth, put the toothbrush carefully back in its holder. We should stay for breakfast. Make her pancakes or something. She probably never has pancakes in this fancy place. We'll see. Now get some sleep. It's been a long day. But Luke himself couldn't sleep. He lay in the expensive bed in the too quiet room, listening to the storm rage outside, and thought about Emily's words. Just truth, even if it's hard. Tomorrow they would finally talk about what happened 15 years ago, would excavate all the buried hurt and unanswered questions and see what, if anything, remained underneath. He should be dreading it. Instead, he found himself hoping that whatever truth they uncovered tomorrow would be enough to build something new on. Something stronger than the first time, informed by years of separate growing and hard-won wisdom. Or maybe it would just confirm that some broken things stayed broken, no matter how skilled the mechanic. Luke woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of his daughter's laughter drifting through the house. For a disoriented moment, he couldn't place where he was. The bed was too comfortable, the sheets too expensive, the light coming through the windows too clean. Then memory flooded back, the storm, the harvest, Emily's phone call with her board chairman, the decision to stay. He checked his phone. 7:30. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky so blue it looked artificial. He pulled on the borrowed clothes from last night, still weird, still too expensive, and followed the sound of voices to a kitchen that was all marble countertops and professional-grade appliances that looked like they'd never been used. Emily stood at the stove, her hair still damp from a shower, wearing jeans and an old Nebraska Cornhuskers sweatshirt that had to be from her college days. She was attempting to flip a pancake and failing spectacularly while Maddie watched from a bar stool with barely contained glee. "You're supposed to wait until the bubbles pop before you flip it," Maddie instructed with the confidence of someone who'd been making breakfast with her dad since she was 5. "I waited. I definitely waited," Emily protested, then caught sight of Luke in the doorway. "Tell your daughter I waited." "You didn't wait," Luke said, unable to suppress a smile. "And you've got the heat too high. Turn it down to medium." Emily made a face but adjusted the burner. "This is why I don't cook. I have a fundamental disagreement with food about the proper temperature for preparation." "That's not how cooking works," Maddie said seriously. "Food doesn't get to disagree. It just follows the laws of thermodynamics." "Well, thermodynamics and I are currently in a fight." Emily poured more batter into the pan, this time waiting the appropriate amount of time before attempting to flip. The pancake turned perfectly golden, and she let out a small cheer. "Did you see that? I made a pancake, an actual non-burned pancake." Luke moved into the kitchen, accepted the coffee mug Emily pressed into his hands, and felt something settle in his chest. This? Emily in her old college sweatshirt, Maddie instructing her on basic cooking, the easy morning light. This felt more real than anything that had happened in the expensive guest rooms or the aggressively modern living spaces. "I thought we were going to make her breakfast," Maddie said, shooting Luke a look that suggested he'd messed up their plan. "I woke up early and couldn't sleep, so I figured I'd attempt breakfast as a thank you for yesterday," Emily explained. "Your dad saved my entire operation, and you were incredibly patient during what had to be the world's most boring evening. Pancakes seemed like the least I could do." She slid the finished pancake onto a plate, handed it to Maddie. "Though I'm realizing now that my pancakes are more of a punishment than a reward." "They're good." Maddie took a bite, chewed thoughtfully. "A little dense, maybe. Did you overmix the batter?" "I mixed it until it looked mixed. How can you overmix something?" Luke took over the stove, gently moving Emily aside. "You can overmix pancake batter because it develops the gluten in the flour, making them tough. You want to mix until just combined, even if there are still some lumps." He demonstrated, pouring batter with one hand while adjusting the heat with the other, falling into the familiar rhythm of cooking breakfast like he did every weekend morning in his own kitchen. Emily watched him with an expression he couldn't quite read, then said quietly, "You're good at this. The domestic stuff. Taking care of people. 4 years of single parenting teaches you a lot." Luke flipped 3 pancakes in quick succession, pleased when they all turned out perfectly. "Plus my mom insisted I learn to cook before I moved out. Said no son of hers was going to live on takeout and regret." "Smart woman. My mom tried to teach me, but I was too busy in the barn with my dad, learning about crop rotation and tractor maintenance instead of kitchen skills." Emily poured herself more coffee, wrapped both hands around the mug like she was trying to absorb its warmth. Seemed more practical at the time. Turns out both skills are pretty essential for adult life. They ate breakfast at the kitchen island, the formal dining room clearly unused, probably had never been used, and Maddie monopolized the conversation with questions about the farm's recovery from the storm. Emily answered patiently, explaining about soil saturation and hail damage assessment, occasionally pulling up photos on her tablet to show the wheat they'd saved, golden and perfect in its protected storage. "So that wheat is going to be seeds for next year?" Maddie asked, scraping up the last of her syrup. "Some of it. We'll plant about 40% for propagation, mill 20% for specialty flour we're developing, and save the rest as backup in case something goes wrong." Emily smiled at Maddie's obvious interest. "You know, if you're ever interested in agriculture, we have a summer internship program for high school students. Obviously, you're a bit young now, but in a few years..." "Really? That would be so cool!" Maddie's eyes lit up, then she glanced at Luke, suddenly uncertain. "I mean, if Dad says it's okay, and if you're still..." She trailed off, the question she was really asking hanging in the air unspoken. Emily's expression softened with understanding. How about this? The internship program isn't going anywhere. When you're old enough, if you're still interested, the door's open. Whether your dad and I are, she paused, choosing her words carefully. Whether things between us are complicated or simple or somewhere in between, that invitation stands. You're a brilliant kid, Maddie, and you should have opportunities to explore what interests you. Luke felt his throat tighten at Emily's deliberate inclusion of his daughter, her careful acknowledgement that whatever happened between them, Maddie's relationship with the farm didn't have to be collateral damage. It was the kind of thoughtfulness that came from someone who understood what it meant to protect a child's heart. After breakfast, Emily suggested Maddie might want to check on the bee monitoring stations with Dr. Reeves, who was already out assessing storm damage. Maddie practically vibrated with excitement at the prospect, and before Luke could even process what was happening, his daughter was bundled into a farm jacket 3 sizes too big and heading out with one of Emily's staff members to find the visiting scientist. Which left Luke and Emily alone in the too quiet house, the unfinished conversation from the night before suddenly taking up all the available space in the room. "So," Emily said, setting down her coffee mug with deliberate care, "I guess we should finally have that talk." "Yeah, I guess we should." Luke's heart was doing something complicated in his chest, but he made himself stay in his seat, made himself stay open to whatever came next. Emily took a breath, seemed to gather herself. "Okay, here's what you need to know about why I left 15 years ago. The whole truth, not the version you've probably been telling yourself." She met his eyes, and there was something vulnerable in her expression that made Luke want to reach across the island and take her hand. He didn't, but the impulse was there. "I loved you," Emily started, and Luke felt the words hit him like a physical thing. "God, I loved you so much it terrified me. You were my best friend, and my first real love, and you saw me in a way nobody else did. Not as the farm girl who was good with tractor engines, not as the kid who'd rather be in the barn than at parties, but as someone who could be more, who could want more." "Then why—" Luke started, but Emily held up a hand. "Let me finish, please. I've been rehearsing this for days, and if I stop, I might not be able to start again." She wrapped her arms around herself, a self-protective gesture that made her look younger, closer to the girl he remembered. "That summer before college, I knew you were going to propose. You'd started working extra shifts, and you had this way of looking at me like you were memorizing my face, and I just knew. And the thing is, part of me wanted to say yes so badly it hurt." Luke felt his breath catch. "Part of you?" "The part that was terrified of leaving, that wanted to stay in the familiar and the safe. The part that thought love was enough to build a life on." Emily's voice wavered slightly, but there was another part, the part that kept reading about Stanford's agricultural program, about research happening in sustainable farming, about ways to save family farms that were dying all across the Midwest. And I knew, Luke, I knew that if I stayed, if I said yes to that ring and that life, I would spend the rest of my days wondering what I could have become. You could have talked to me about it. We could have figured something out. Could we? Emily's question was gentle but pointed. You'd already decided to stay in Crawford, take over your dad's shop. You'd made peace with your path, and that was okay. That was your choice, and it was a good choice. But it wasn't my choice. And I was 18 and terrified and certain that if I tried to explain, you'd either convince me to stay or I'd convince myself to stay, and either way I'd end up resenting you for it eventually. Luke absorbed this, working through the implications. So you just left, broke up with me 3 weeks before you flew to California and never looked back. I looked back. Emily's voice broke slightly. God, I looked back so many times. Every major decision I made in college, I wondered what you'd think. Every time something good happened, you were the first person I wanted to tell. When I came home for my dad's funeral and I saw you across the church with Sarah and baby Maddie, I had to leave before the service even ended because I couldn't breathe. You were at the funeral? Luke's mind was reeling. I didn't see you. I made sure you didn't, because what was I going to say? Sorry your life moved on without me. Sorry I chose Stanford over us. Sorry I'm not brave enough to even talk to you about it. Emily laughed, but there were tears in her eyes now. I went back to California the same day and threw myself into building the company, into proving that the choice I'd made was worth what it cost. And it was, Luke. The company, the technology, the farms we've saved, it was worth it. But sometimes, late at night in this empty house, I wonder if it was worth what I lost. Luke stood up, needing to move, needing to process this information while his body did something physical. He walked to the kitchen windows, looked out at the farm spread before them, the restored barn, the experimental fields, the solar panels and wind turbines, and all the evidence of Emily's vision made real. "You're right," he said finally, his voice rough. "If you'd stayed, you wouldn't have built this. You wouldn't have become the person who could save family farms across the country. You wouldn't be Emily Carter, CEO of a company that's changing agriculture." He turned to look at her. "But Em, you didn't just leave me. You disappeared. No calls, no emails, no contact for 15 years. That's what hurt. Not that you chose your dreams. I understood that eventually, but that you chose them without even giving me the chance to support you." Emily was crying openly now, not bothering to wipe away the tears. I know, and I'm so sorry. I thought a clean break would be easier for both of us. I thought if we stayed in touch, it would just prolong the pain. And then years went by, and every year it got harder to reach out, until it felt impossible, like too much time had passed, like you'd moved on and forgotten, and I'd just be reopening old wounds. "I never forgot you." The admission came out quiet but certain. "Even when I was married to Sarah, even when I was trying my hardest to build a different life, you were always there, in the back of my mind, the standard I measured everything against." "That's not fair to Sarah or to yourself." "No, it wasn't, which is probably why that marriage was doomed from the start." Luke moved back to the kitchen island, sat across from Emily, close enough to see the gold flecks in her brown eyes. "We were both trying to replace something we'd lost, trying to prove we could move forward. But you can't build a new relationship on the foundation of an old one. It doesn't work." They sat in heavy silence for a moment, the weight of 15 years of missed communication pressing down on both of them. Finally, Emily spoke, her voice small. "So where does that leave us now? I'm still the person who left. You're still the person who stayed. Nothing about those fundamental facts has changed." "Everything's changed," Luke countered. "We're not 18 anymore, making decisions based on fear and assumptions. We're adults who've lived entire lives, made mistakes, learned things. And I'm not going to lie, part of me is still angry about how you handled it. But a bigger part of me understands why you did what you did. And an even bigger part is just grateful to have you back in my life, even if it's complicated." "It's very complicated," Emily said, but there was something like hope in her voice. "My board is looking for reasons to question my judgment. Your daughter is terrified of getting attached to someone who might leave. We live completely different lives in completely different worlds. The practical obstacles alone are just obstacles, not impossibilities." Luke reached across the island, and this time he did take her hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly, and he wrapped both of his hands around hers. "I'm not saying we jump into something. I'm not saying we ignore the complications. But I'm saying that maybe, after 15 years, we owe it to ourselves to see if what we had was just young love, or if it's something that can survive in the real world." Emily's thumb traced circles on his palm, the gesture unconscious and achingly familiar. "What about Maddie?" "Maddie's the priority, always. Which means we go slow, we're honest with her, and we make damn sure that whatever happens between us doesn't hurt her." Luke squeezed her hand gently. "But Em, she already likes you. She told me you see her as actually smart, not just smart for a kid. That means everything to her. And honestly, watching you two together, it makes me think this might not be as impossible as it seems." "And your life in Crawford? Your shop? I can't ask you to give that up." "You're not asking, and I'm not offering to give it up. I love my work, I love my town, but that doesn't mean there's no room for anything else." Luke paused, thinking through the logistics. "The farm's 43 minutes from my shop. That's not nothing, but it's not insurmountable. And there are things I could do here. Equipment maintenance, training programs for vintage repairs, consulting on the blend of old and new technology you're trying to develop. Things that would let me keep my business and still be part of what you're building." Emily's eyes widened. "You've thought about this." "I've thought about nothing else for the past week. Every time I tell myself it's too complicated, my brain immediately starts solving the problems." Luke smiled, self-deprecating. "Mechanic's curse. I see broken things, and I can't help trying to fix them. Is that what we are? Broken things that need fixing? No. We're things that were broken 15 years ago and have been healing separately. The question is whether we're healed enough, and in the right ways, to maybe try building something new together. Emily stood up abruptly, walked to the kitchen windows where Luke had stood minutes before. She was quiet for so long that Luke started to worry he'd pushed too hard, revealed too much. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared, Luke. I'm scared of hurting you again. I'm scared of my board forcing me out and losing everything I've built. I'm scared that I'm fundamentally broken in ways that make me bad at relationships. My marriage failed for a reason, and it wasn't all his fault. I'm scared that I'll wake up one day and feel that same suffocating need to leave, to move, to be somewhere else. She turned to face him, and her expression was raw with vulnerability. What if I break your heart again? What if I break Maddie's heart? What if I'm the kind of person who destroys good things because I don't know how to stay? Luke went to her, stood close enough that he could see the fear and hope warring in her eyes. What if you're not? What if you left because you were 18 and didn't have the tools to communicate what you needed? What if you're not your mother or your ex-husband or anyone else who made you believe you're incapable of staying? What if you're just Emily, brilliant and driven and sometimes scared, but fundamentally good and trying her best? You're being awfully generous for someone whose heart I broke. I'm being realistic. People are complicated. Choices are complicated. And I spent too many years being angry at a version of you that probably never existed to waste more time on resentment. Luke reached up, gently brushed a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture so familiar it made his chest ache. I'm not promising it'll be easy. I'm not promising we won't mess it up. But I am promising that we're both different people now, with more tools and more wisdom and more scars that taught us things. Maybe that's enough to start with. Emily leaned into his touch, and for a moment they just stood there, close enough to kiss but not closing that final distance, letting the possibility hang between them. Then Emily's phone buzzed insistently, shattering the moment. She checked it, grimaced. It's my assistant. The board moved up Monday's meeting to tomorrow. They want me in San Francisco by evening. She looked at Luke, frustration and resignation mixing in her expression. I have to go. Pack, catch a flight, prepare presentations that will hopefully convince a room full of skeptical investors that I know what I'm doing. Then you should go do that. Luke stepped back, giving her space. And Em, you do know what you're doing. Don't let them make you doubt that. Will you be here when I get back? Not physically here, I know you have a business to run, but here, available. Willing to keep figuring this out? I'll be here. We'll be here, Luke corrected, including Maddie in that promise. But you need to promise me something too. What? Promise that if you start feeling that suffocating need to leave, you'll tell me. That you'll talk to me instead of disappearing. That we'll at least try to work through it before you make any drastic decisions. Emily's eyes shimmered with fresh tears, but she nodded. I promise. No more running without talking first. They stood there for another moment, the unspoken words piling up between them. I still love you. I never stopped loving you. What if this works? What if it doesn't? But neither of them said them out loud. It was too soon, too raw, too uncertain. Instead, Emily squeezed his hand once, then went to pack for San Francisco. And Luke went to find his daughter and figure out how to explain that things were changing, but maybe in a good way. He found Maddie in the North Field with Dr. Reeves, both of them crouched next to a bee monitoring station, discussing something involving pollen samples and native species diversity. When Maddie saw him approaching, she ran over, her face flushed with cold and excitement. Dad, Dr. Reeves is letting me help collect samples, and she says if I write up my observations, she'll include them in her research notes with my name on them, like actual scientific research. Luke couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. That's amazing, kiddo. But we need to head home soon. I've got appointments at the shop Monday morning, and you have school. Can we come back next weekend, please? Dr. Reeves will still be here, and she says she's going to be setting up audio recorders to capture bee sounds. Did you know different bee species make different buzzing frequencies? It's so cool. Luke glanced back at the house, where he could see Emily moving past a window, phone pressed to her ear, already shifting into CEO mode. Yeah, kiddo. We can come back next weekend. I think we're going to be spending more time here. Because of the tractor? Maddie asked, too innocently. Because of a lot of things. The tractor, the farm, Emily, all of it. Luke crouched down to Maddie's eye level. How would you feel about that? About us spending more time here, me maybe doing some work for Emily's company, you having more chances to learn about science and farming? Maddie's expression went serious, considering. Would it be like when Mom left? Where you're all happy at first and then things get weird and then someone leaves and I lose another person I care about? The question hit Luke like a gut punch. I can't promise nothing will ever change or that people won't leave. But I can promise that Emily and I are talking to each other, being honest about what we want and what we're scared of. And I can promise that no matter what happens between Emily and me, you come first, always. But you like her, like really like her. Like, I can tell. Yeah, I really like her. I have history with her that's complicated, and I'm trying to figure out if that history can become a future. Luke chose his words carefully. But that doesn't mean I'm going to make stupid decisions or rush into things or forget that you're the most important person in my life, okay? Maddie studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay. But Dad? If you're going to date Emily, you should probably tell her about the overdue rent and the bills on the kitchen counter, because secrets are bad for relationships. You told me that when I hid my bad math test last year. Luke couldn't help but laugh even as embarrassment heated his face. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just notice more when it's inconvenient. She grinned, echoing her own words from days earlier, then sobered. I like Emily, Dad. She makes you smile different than you normally smile. Like you're actually happy instead of just okay. I want you to be actually happy. Luke pulled his daughter into a hug, feeling gratitude and love and fear all tangled together in his chest. I want to be actually happy too, kiddo. Let's see if we can figure out how to make that happen. They said goodbye to Dr. Reeves, collected Maddie's backpack from Emily's office, and were loading the truck when Emily came out, dressed now in clothes suitable for San Francisco boardrooms, tailored pants and a blazer that probably cost more than Luke's truck. She looked polished and professional, and completely unlike the woman who'd been attempting pancakes a few hours earlier. Safe travels, Luke said, suddenly awkward with Maddie watching them. Thanks. I'll text you when I land. Emily looked at Maddie. And you, brilliant scientist, keep asking good questions and making observations. Dr. Reeves was genuinely impressed with your insights. She was just being nice because I'm a kid, Maddie said, but she was clearly pleased. She wasn't. I've worked with Dr. Reeves for 3 years, and she doesn't patronize anyone, regardless of age. If she said you had good insights, she meant it. Emily squeezed Maddie's shoulder, then looked at Luke. Monday evening I should be back. Can we have dinner? All 3 of us? Nothing fancy, just talking, figuring things out. Yeah, we can do that. Luke wanted to say more, wanted to pull her close and tell her to knock their skepticism out in San Francisco, wanted to promise that he'd be here when she got back. But Maddie was watching, and this was already a lot for an 8-year-old to process, so he settled for a small smile and a nod that he hoped conveyed everything he wasn't saying. Emily nodded back, understanding in her eyes, then climbed into her own truck, a sensible Ford F-250, not the Tesla from the parking area, Luke noticed with approval, and drove off toward the farm's private airstrip, where apparently she kept a plane, because of course she did. The drive home was quiet, Maddie lost in thought, Luke's mind already spinning with everything that had been said and unsaid. When they pulled into their driveway, the small rental house looked shabbier than usual, the contrast with Emily's sprawling modern home painfully obvious. The screen door still squeaked, the yard still needed mowing, the whole place had the worn look of barely making it that Luke usually ignored but now felt acutely. It's not fancy, but it's home, Maddie said quietly, reading his thoughts in the way she sometimes did. Yeah, it's home. Luke grabbed their bags from the truck bed. Come on, let's get inside. I think we both could use some normal for a while. But normal proved elusive. Luke spent Sunday catching up on neglected shop work, but his mind kept drifting to Emily facing down her board, to the possibility of something new being built from the ruins of something old. When his phone buzzed with a text late Sunday evening, his heart jumped before he even checked who it was. Emily. Landed safely, Board meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. their time. Terrified but ready. Thank you for yesterday, for all of it, for being willing to try. Luke, you're going to be great. They'd be idiots not to see how brilliant you are. Talk tomorrow? Emily. Tomorrow. Sweet dreams, Luke Harlan. Luke stared at that last message for longer than was probably reasonable, then typed back, Sweet dreams, M. Monday crawled by with agonizing slowness. Luke fixed a transmission, diagnosed electrical issues in a Mazda, and pretended he wasn't checking his phone every 10 minutes for updates. Maddie asked about Emily twice, both times with studied casualness that didn't fool Luke at all. They were both waiting, both hoping, both terrified to hope too much. Emily's text came at 4:30. Board meeting done. Not great, but not terrible. They're monitoring the situation, which is corporate speak for, we don't trust your judgment, but we can't legally remove you yet. Flying home tonight? Rain check on dinner? I'm exhausted and not fit for human company. Luke. Rain check accepted. You okay? Emily. Define okay. I'm not fired. The company still exists, and I get to keep trying to save farms while my board second guesses every decision. So yeah, I guess I'm okay. Just tired. Really, really tired. Luke. Get some rest. We'll talk when you're ready. But Tuesday brought a new crisis, and Wednesday too. Emily was dealing with equipment malfunctions and supplier negotiations and all the daily emergencies of running a farm and a company. They texted sporadically, good morning messages, brief updates, the occasional photo of Maddie's latest project or a sunset over the fields, but nothing substantial, nothing that moved them forward from the conversation they'd started Saturday morning. Thursday evening, Luke was closing up the shop when his phone rang. Emily's name, but instead of relief, dread pooled in his stomach. Phone calls meant something was wrong. Hey, he answered, keeping his voice neutral. Luke? Emily's voice was strained, wound tight. I need to tell you something, and I need you to not make any decisions until I finish talking. Can you do that? What's wrong? My board held an emergency meeting today. Apparently one of the investors did some digging into my recent activities. The tractor repair, the emergency harvest, you working here. They're concerned about appearances, about whether I'm prioritizing personal relationships over sound business decisions. She took a shaky breath. They've given me an ultimatum. Either I maintain strict professional boundaries and bring in an outside consultant to oversee farm operations, demonstrating that I'm putting company interests first, or they'll call for a vote of no confidence. Luke's grip tightened on his phone. That's ridiculous. Everything I did was professional. The repairs were needed, the harvest was critical. I know that, and you know that. But perception matters to investors. They see a mechanic from my past suddenly doing work for my company. They see me spending time on a vintage tractor that has more sentimental value than practical value, and they construct a narrative about poor judgment. Emily's voice cracked slightly. Luke, I think I need to step back from us. Not because I want to, but because I can't risk losing the company. Too many people depend on it. Too many farms rely on the technology we're developing. I can't let my personal life destroy that. The words hung in the air between them, and Luke felt something cold settle in his chest. History repeating itself. Emily choosing her career over them, leaving to protect what she'd built. Except this time was worse, because this time they'd both known better. Both promised to communicate. Both believed they were old enough and wise enough to make it work. So that's it? Luke's voice came out flat. Your board applies pressure, and you just fold? No fight, no pushing back, just immediately sacrifice whatever this is between us? It's not that simple. It seems pretty simple from where I'm standing. Once again, when things get hard, you choose the safe option. You leave. Luke knew he was being unfair even as the words came out, knew that Emily was in an impossible situation, but the hurt was overriding his rational brain. And the worst part? I can't even be angry because you're probably right. You probably should protect your company. You probably should maintain professional boundaries. You probably should cut ties with the small-town mechanic who's just a complication you don't need. Luke, please don't. I have to go. Maddie has homework, and I have a business to run. He was being cruel now, using her own words against her, and he hated himself for it even as he couldn't stop. Good luck with your board, Em. Hope they're worth it. He ended the call before she could respond, then immediately wanted to call back, to apologize, to take it all back. But his pride and his hurt wouldn't let him, so instead he sat in his truck in the empty shop parking lot and let himself feel the full weight of losing Emily Carter for the second time in his life. This time, though, it hurt even worse, because this time he'd known exactly what he was losing. Luke sat in his truck for 20 minutes before he could trust himself to drive home. When he finally did, Maddie took one look at his face and went quiet in that way she had when she knew something was badly wrong. They ate dinner in near silence, mac and cheese from a box, the comfort food that never actually brought comfort, and Luke pretended not to notice when Maddie pushed her food around her plate without eating much. "Emily's not coming over, is she?" Maddie finally asked as Luke was washing dishes, her voice small and resigned in a way that made his heart crack further. "No, kiddo, she's not." "Because her board doesn't approve?" "I heard you on the phone. You weren't exactly quiet." Luke set down the dish he was washing, turned to face his daughter. "It's complicated. Emily has a company to run and investors to answer to, and sometimes that means making hard choices. That's adult speak for she's choosing work over us." Maddie's eyes were dry, but her voice shook slightly, just like Mom did. "Everyone always chooses something else." "That's not," Luke started, then stopped because what could he say? That Emily was different? That the situation was more nuanced? None of that mattered to an 8-year-old who was watching another important person disappear from her life. "I'm sorry, Maddie. I'm sorry I let you get attached. I'm sorry I thought this time would be different." Maddie came over, wrapped her arms around his waist in a fierce hug. "It's not your fault, Dad. You always try to see the good in people. That's one of the things I love about you, even when it means you get hurt." She pulled back, looked up at him with eyes too old for her face. "But I'm still mad at her. She made you smile different, and now she's making you sad different, which is worse." That night, Luke lay awake staring at his ceiling, his phone dark and silent on the nightstand. Part of him kept expecting it to ring, expecting Emily to call back and fight for them the way he'd been too hurt and proud to fight. But the phone stayed silent, and eventually Luke fell into restless sleep filled with dreams of dusty barns and roads not taken and second chances that slipped through his fingers. Friday morning brought gray skies and a schedule full of repairs that Luke attacked with grim determination. Work was safe. Work made sense. Engines had problems with identifiable solutions, unlike human relationships which seemed designed to break in ways you couldn't repair no matter how skilled you were. He was under a Nissan, wrestling with a stubborn oil filter when his phone buzzed. He almost ignored it, probably just a customer confirming an appointment, but something made him slide out and check. Not Emily, Dr. Reeves, the bee researcher. The message was brief. "Mr. Harlan, I realize this is presumptuous, but I think you should know that Emily hasn't left her office in 2 days. She's been working nonstop, barely sleeping, refusing to talk to anyone about anything that isn't directly farm-related. I don't know what happened between you two, but whatever it was, she's not handling it well. I thought you should know." Luke stared at the message, emotions warring in his chest. The petty part of him thought good, let her hurt the way I'm hurting. But the larger part, the part that had loved Emily at 17 and was maybe falling in love with her again at 33, couldn't stand the thought of her suffering alone. He was still debating what to do when another text came through, this time from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Harlan, this is Jessica Chen from Carter Agritech. Emily doesn't know I'm contacting you, and she'd probably fire me if she found out, but you need to know what happened in that board meeting. The consultant they're bringing in? It's her ex-husband. The board chairman specifically requested him, knowing their history. They're not trying to protect the company. They're trying to push her out and install someone they can control. Emily knows this, and she's trying to handle it alone because she thinks that's what strong leaders do. But she's breaking, Mr. Harlan, and I don't know how to help her." Luke read the message 3 times, fury building with each pass. Her ex-husband. They were bringing in her ex-husband as the outside consultant, the person who'd made Emily feel broken and incapable of relationships. This wasn't about professional boundaries or sound business practices. This was a power play, and Emily was caught in the middle of it. He called Jessica Chen immediately. She answered on the first ring. "Thank you for calling back. I wasn't sure you would." "Tell me everything, and don't leave anything out." Jessica laid it out in quick, efficient detail. The board chairman, Donald Morrison, had been trying to push Emily toward a more aggressive growth strategy, selling out to a larger agricultural conglomerate, going public, prioritizing profit over the mission of helping small farms. Emily had been resisting, maintaining that Carter Agritech needed to stay true to its roots. So Morrison had orchestrated this, finding the smallest excuse to question her judgment, then bringing in Christopher Whitmore, Emily's ex-husband and a venture capitalist who'd made millions buying struggling companies and stripping them for parts. He'll do a review, find inefficiencies, and recommend changes that align with Morrison's vision, Jessica explained. And because he's an outside consultant with an impressive resume, the other board members will defer to his expertise. Emily will be marginalized in her own company, and eventually she'll either quit in frustration or they'll manufacture cause to remove her. And Emily knows this? She knows. But she also knows that fighting it publicly could tank the company's valuation and hurt all the farmers who depend on their technology. So she's trying to outwork the problem, prove her value through sheer determination and perfect execution. She thinks if she's good enough, works hard enough, makes no mistakes, they won't be able to touch her. Jessica's voice dropped. But Mr. Harlan, nobody can be that perfect. She's going to burn out or break down, and then they'll use that as evidence that she's not fit to lead. Luke's mind was already working through the angles, seeing the trap Emily was caught in. She couldn't fight without risking the company. She couldn't comply without losing control. And she was trying to handle it alone because she'd spent her whole life believing that asking for help was weakness. Jessica, what does Emily need? Not what the board needs, not what the company needs. What does she actually need to get through this? There was a pause, then Jessica said quietly, she needs someone who sees her as Emily, not Emily Carter, the CEO. Someone who reminds her why she built this company in the first place. Someone who won't let her disappear into work and pretend she's fine when she's not. Another pause. She needs you, Mr. Harlan, even if she's too stubborn to admit it. Luke ended the call and stood in his shop, grease-stained and exhausted, facing the same choice he'd faced 15 years ago when Emily left for Stanford. He could protect himself, maintain his boundaries, let her handle her problems alone. It would be safer that way, less risk of getting hurt again. Or he could fight for her. Fight for them. Show up even when she'd pushed him away, because sometimes love meant not accepting someone's fear-driven decisions as final. Maddie! Luke called toward the office. Pack your backpack. We're taking a road trip. Maddie appeared in the doorway, homework in hand, suspicious hope in her eyes. Where are we going? To remind a very stubborn woman that she doesn't have to face everything alone. Luke was already pulling off his work coveralls, mentally calculating drive time. And to tell a board of directors that they picked the wrong mechanic to mess with. The drive to Carter Agricultural Operations took 43 minutes, during which Maddie peppered Luke with questions he didn't have good answers to. What was he going to say? What if Emily didn't want to see him? What if he made things worse? Luke didn't know, but he knew that doing nothing, letting Emily fight alone, letting fear and corporate politics win, would haunt him forever. The farm looked the same as always when they arrived, but there was a tension in the air Luke could feel even from the parking area. People moved with deliberate efficiency, conversations conducted in low voices, everyone walking on eggshells. He spotted Jessica near the main office and headed straight for her. Where is she? Her office, second floor. But Mr. Harlan, she's in a conference call with the board right now. They're discussing transition protocols for when Christopher arrives next week. She gave explicit instructions not to be disturbed. Good thing I'm terrible at following instructions. Luke looked at Maddie. Stay with Jessica. If I'm not back in 20 minutes, call Mrs. Kowalski and ask her to come get you. Dad, what are you going to do? Something either really brave or really stupid, possibly both. Luke squeezed his daughter's shoulder, then headed into the main office before his rational brain could intervene. He took the stairs 2 at a time, followed the sound of Emily's voice to a corner office with glass walls. She sat at a conference table, laptop open, looking exhausted and impeccable in equal measure. Her hair was pulled back severely, her blazer perfectly pressed, but he could see the shadows under her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the way her hand trembled slightly as she took notes. Understand the board's concerns about operational efficiency, Emily was saying into the laptop, her voice professional and empty of emotion. I'm prepared to cooperate fully with Mr. Whitmore's review and implement any reasonable recommendations. Luke didn't knock. He opened the door and walked in, and the shock on Emily's face would have been comical under different circumstances. Luke, I'm in the middle of a board meeting, I know. Perfect timing. Luke moved into the camera's frame, addressed the screen where he could see multiple faces in gallery view. Good afternoon, board members. I'm Luke Harlan, the mechanic who apparently caused such concern by doing my job competently. I have a few things to say and you're going to listen. Mr. Harlan, this is a closed meeting. That was Morrison, the board chairman, looking outraged and slightly alarmed. And I don't care. Here's what you need to know. Emily Carter is the best thing that ever happened to this company, to sustainable agriculture, and to every small farmer who's managed to stay afloat because of the technology she developed. She built this company from nothing because she actually understands farming, not just profit margins and growth projections. She works 16-hour days, turns down lucrative offers from competitors, and prioritizes mission over money at every turn. And you're trying to push her out because she refused to compromise her values for your bottom line. That's not, Morrison started, but Luke talked over him. I'm not finished. You brought in her ex-husband as a consultant, not because he's the most qualified, because he's someone you think you can control, someone who'll recommend exactly what you want him to recommend, regardless of what's actually best for the company. You're not protecting Carter Agritech. You're executing a hostile takeover of a company you don't understand, built by a woman you underestimate, for reasons that have nothing to do with sound business practice. Emily had gone completely still, her eyes locked on Luke with an expression he couldn't quite read. The board members were talking over each other now, but Luke ignored them. Here's what I propose. Let Emily run her company the way she's been running it. Trust the person who built it from the ground up. And if you can't do that, if you're so committed to this outside review, then I'll be part of it. I'll work with whatever consultant you bring in, show them exactly how Emily blends traditional knowledge with modern technology, demonstrate why the choices she makes are smart even when they look sentimental. I'll be your bridge between the old way and the new way, and I'll do it on the record so there's no question about bias or personal relationships. And why would we trust you? Morrison's voice dripped with skepticism. Because I have no stake in this company's profit margins. I don't benefit from growth or suffer from efficiency improvements. I'm a mechanic who fixes broken things because they're worth fixing. And Emily's company isn't broken. It's just different from what you expected, and that scares you. Luke leaned toward the camera. But here's what should scare you more. Losing the only person who actually understands what you're trying to accomplish. Emily Carter is irreplaceable. Fire her, push her out, or marginalize her, and you'll spend the next 5 years trying to figure out why the company is failing without ever understanding that you destroyed the only thing that made it work in the first place. The silence that followed was deafening. Luke could see the board members exchanging glances, Morrison's face red with either anger or embarrassment. Then a woman Luke didn't recognize spoke up, her voice thoughtful. Mr. Harlan makes some interesting points. Morrison, you said the outside review was about ensuring best practices, not about questioning Emily's leadership. If that's true, then surely having someone with Mr. Harlan's expertise participate wouldn't be a problem. Patricia, that's not how we typically structure these reviews. Morrison started, but Patricia cut him off. I'm calling for a vote. All in favor of postponing the outside consultant arrangement and instead implementing a collaborative assessment with Ms. Carter and Mr. Harlan working together to document current practices and recommend improvements? Luke watched as hands started going up on the screen. Not all of them. Morrison stayed firmly down, along with 2 others who were probably his allies, but enough. Enough to stop the hostile takeover, at least temporarily. Motion carries, Patricia said with satisfaction. Emily, I apologize for the way this has been handled. You've earned the right to be heard, not circumvented. Mr. Harlan, if you're serious about that offer, we'll have contracts drawn up. And Morrison? Her voice went steely. Perhaps you and I need to have a conversation about appropriate board conduct. Morrison's video feed clicked off abruptly, followed by several others. Patricia remained, and she looked at Emily with something like sympathy. You've built something special here, Emily. Don't let anyone make you forget that. We'll talk next week about long-term governance structure, but for now, just keep doing what you do best. Then she was gone too, and Luke and Emily were alone in the office. the silence stretching between them like a chasm. "You didn't have to do that," Emily finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, I did, because someone needed to fight for you, and you were too busy trying to be strong alone to ask for help." Luke moved closer, perched on the edge of the conference table. "And I'm sorry. For Thursday night, for the things I said, for not being brave enough to fight then instead of running away hurt. You had every right to be hurt. I was pushing you away again, choosing the safe option over the hard fight." Emily's hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "I've spent my whole life believing that asking for help was weakness, that handling everything alone was what strong people did. And when the board came at me, my first instinct was to protect everyone else by sacrificing what I wanted, just like when I was 18. And what do you want now?" Emily looked at him, and there were tears streaming down her face now, all the carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "I want to stop being so scared of needing people. I want to build something with you that doesn't require me to sacrifice pieces of myself to maintain it. I want Maddie to have someone in her life who shows up and stays and proves that not everyone leaves." Her voice broke. "I want you, Luke. Not despite the complications, but including them. All of it. The messy parts and the hard parts, and the parts where we have to figure things out as we go." Luke closed the distance between them, pulled Emily into his arms, and felt her collapse against him like a puppet with cut strings. She was shaking and crying and holding on to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had been trying to knock her down. And Luke just held her, letting her be not strong for once, letting her be human and scared and imperfect. "I've got you," he murmured into her hair. "I've got you, and I'm not going anywhere. Not when things get hard. Not when boards apply pressure. Not when your ex-husband shows up, or investors get nervous, or any of the 1,000 other complications that are definitely coming. I'm staying, Em, for real this time. Both of us are staying." They stood like that for a long time, Emily's tears soaking into Luke's shirt, both of them breathing through the relief and fear and hope of this moment. Finally, Emily pulled back, wiped her eyes, laughed shakily at her own mess. "I look terrible. Mascara everywhere, eyes all puffy, professionally disastrous." "You look real," Luke said, reaching up to wipe a smudge from her cheek. "You look like Emily, not Emily Carter, the CEO. And that's the person I fell in love with at 17, and the person I think I'm falling in love with again now." Emily's breath caught. "You can't just say things like that." "Why not? It's true. And we've wasted 15 years on things left unsaid. I'm done with that." Luke took her hands, held them firmly. "I love you. I love your drive and your intelligence and your absolutely terrible cooking skills. I love that you care more about heritage wheat than profit margins. I love that you see Maddie as actually brilliant, not just smart for a kid. I love that you're messy and complicated and sometimes make decisions out of fear. I love all of it, Em. The perfect parts and the broken parts and everything in between." "I love you too," Emily whispered. "I never stopped. Even when I convinced myself I had, even when I married someone else, even when I built a life that had no space for what we had, I never stopped loving you, Luke Harlan. And that terrified me because I didn't know how to love someone without losing myself in the process. So we figure it out together. We make mistakes and fix them. We communicate instead of running. We build something new that honors what we were but isn't limited by it." Luke smiled, felt something settle in his chest that had been unsettled for 15 years. "And we start by going downstairs and telling Maddie that she was right. I do smile different around you, and that's a good thing." Emily laughed, a real laugh this time, and kissed him. It was gentle and careful, and tasted like tears and coffee and second chances. And when they finally pulled apart, Luke felt like he was 17 again, except better, wiser, more certain of what he was choosing and why. They found Maddie in the barn, helping Dr. Reeves catalog bee samples and pretending she wasn't worried sick. When she saw them walk in together, Emily's hand in Luke's, her entire face transformed with cautious hope. "So you're not leaving?" Maddie asked Emily, the question careful and loaded with more meaning than just physical departure. "I'm not leaving. Not the farm, not your dad, not you." Emily crouched down to Maddie's level. "And I need to apologize to you, Maddie. I made you worry that I was going to disappear like your mom did, and that wasn't fair. You deserve better than adults who say they care and then leave when things get complicated. So you're staying, even though your board is being jerks? Even though? Actually, because your dad helped me remember that some things are worth fighting for, especially when that fight is hard. Emily glanced up at Luke, then back at Maddie. But I also need you to know that this is going to be messy sometimes. I'm going to make mistakes, and your dad and I will probably argue about stuff, and there will be times when I'm stressed about the company or traveling for business. That doesn't mean I'm leaving. It just means life is complicated, and we're going to work through it together. Maddie studied Emily for a long moment with those two perceptive eyes, then seemed to come to a decision. Okay, but if you do leave, I'm going to be really mad. And I'll probably write you a very detailed letter explaining exactly why your decision was illogical and emotionally damaging. Fair warning. Emily laughed, pulled Maddie into a hug. Fair warning received. If I ever try to leave, I fully expect a comprehensive analysis of my failures, and I'll probably deserve every word. Over the next several weeks, they built a new rhythm. Luke started spending 3 days a week at the farm, working with Emily's team to document the blend of vintage and modern equipment that made Carter Agritech unique. He developed training protocols for mechanics on how to maintain the older machines, created repair manuals that honored traditional knowledge while incorporating new technology, and slowly became part of the farm's infrastructure in a way that felt natural rather than forced. Maddie came with him on Saturdays, splitting her time between helping Dr. Reeves with pollinator research and learning about sustainable farming practices from Emily's team. She drew elaborate designs for integrated farm systems that combined old-school wisdom with cutting-edge tech, and Emily put them up in her office next to blueprints and financial projections, treating them as seriously as any other proposal. The collaborative assessment that Luke had proposed turned out to be exactly what the company needed. Instead of Christopher Whitmore arriving to pick apart everything Emily had built, Luke worked with Patricia, the board member who'd spoken up during that dramatic meeting, to create a comprehensive review that highlighted strengths as often as it identified areas for improvement. The recommendations they made were practical and respectful of Emily's vision, and even Morrison grudgingly admitted that the process had value. Christopher Whitmore never did show up for his consulting gig. Rumor was that Patricia had made it clear his services weren't needed, and his involvement had been inappropriate given his personal history with Emily. Morrison quietly stepped down from the board 3 months later, citing other commitments, though everyone knew he'd been pressured out. Luke's shop in Crawford stayed open, but he hired a part-time mechanic to handle the days he was at the farm. It was tight financially at first, the cost of additional staff eating into already thin margins. But then Emily's company started referring other farms to him for vintage equipment repairs, and suddenly he had more work than he could handle. Within 6 months, he'd expanded from a one-man operation to a small team, and the overdue rent and mounting bills became memories rather than constant anxiety. 8 months after that board meeting, Emily called Luke into her office with a nervous energy he'd learned to recognize. She had something planned, something important, and she was both excited and terrified about it. So I've been thinking, she started, then stopped, laughed at herself. Okay, that's an understatement. I've been obsessing, planning, designing, possibly losing sleep over this idea. Should I be worried? Maybe, probably. I don't know yet. Emily pulled up something on her computer, turned the screen toward him. What if we made this official? Not us. We're already official, or as official as two people who are still figuring things out can be. But this, she gestured at the screen which showed architectural renderings of a new facility. Harlan and Carter Agricultural Services, a combination training center, repair facility, and research lab. We teach the next generation of mechanics how to work with both vintage and modern farm equipment, help small farms maintain their operations affordably, and develop new technologies that honor traditional farming wisdom. Luke stared at the renderings, his heart doing something complicated in his chest. The building design incorporated elements of the original barn, the same weathered wood, the same structure, but expanded and modernized. There were classroom spaces and equipment bays, offices and research stations, everything needed to turn their informal collaboration into something permanent and institutional. This is incredible. But it's also massive. The cost alone is something I can afford. The company's in solid shape now, and I want to invest in this. Not as charity or as some kind of gift, but as a genuine business partnership. You'd own 50%, have equal say in operations, and we'd build this together. Emily's voice was earnest, almost pleading. Luke, what we've been doing these past months, it works. You're teaching my team things they couldn't learn anywhere else, and I'm helping you reach farmers who need your skills. Why not formalize it? Make it something that outlasts both of us? You've really thought this through. I've thought about almost nothing else for 3 months. I had architects draw up plans, ran financial projections, even scouted locations. There's a property about 20 minutes from here, 20 minutes from Crawford, right in the middle, accessible to both. It's perfect, Luke. We'd be perfect. Luke studied the renderings, imagining the reality of it. A real facility, not just borrowed space in Emily's barn, his own team, properly equipped and trained. The ability to serve more farmers, preserve more knowledge, build something that would matter long after they were gone. It was everything he'd ever wanted, but had never let himself dream was possible. There's one condition, he said slowly. Emily's face fell slightly. What? The vintage John Deere 4450, the one we restored together at 17, the one I fixed when all this started. It's the centerpiece, right in the middle of the training facility where everyone can see it. A reminder that some things are worth preserving, worth fighting for, worth the effort it takes to keep them running. Emily's smile was brilliant enough to light the entire room. Deal. Absolutely deal. Though I have a condition of my own. What's that? We let Maddie design the logo. She's been sketching ideas for weeks. She somehow found out about this plan before you did, which tells you something about my inability to keep secrets. Her designs are actually really good. Better than the professional firm I consulted, honestly. Luke laughed, pulled Emily close. My daughter, the future designer, scientist, farmer, everything. She gets it from her dad. The belief that you can be multiple things, that choosing one path doesn't mean closing off all the others. Emily rested her head against Luke's chest, and he could feel her heartbeat sinking with his. Thank you for not giving up on me, on us, for showing up when I was too scared to ask you to, for proving that some broken things can be fixed if you're willing to do the work. We did the work together, Luke corrected, and we're going to keep doing it, through whatever comes next. What came next was both easier and harder than either of them expected. The facility took 18 months to build, during which they navigated permits and contractors and the 1,000 small disasters that come with any major construction project. They argued about design choices and budget allocations and the proper way to organize tool storage. They learned each other's work styles, discovered incompatibilities, and developed systems to bridge them. Maddie grew into a thoughtful 10-year-old who split her time between her dad's house in Crawford and increasingly frequent stays at Emily's farm. They never made it official, no moving in together, no rushing toward traditional family structures, but they built something that worked for all three of them. Something flexible enough to accommodate Emily's travel schedule and Luke's business obligations and Maddie's need for stability. Sarah called more frequently, perhaps sensing through some parental instinct that her daughter was building a life that no longer had space for absent parents. She asked about visiting, about maybe being more involved, and Luke and Maddie talked about it seriously before agreeing to tentative steps forward. It would never be what it should have been, but maybe it could be something. The grand opening of Harlan and Carter Agricultural Services happened on a perfect September day, 2 years after Luke had first driven out to fix what he'd thought was just a broken tractor. The original John Deere 4450 sat in the center of the main training facility, fully restored and gleaming, surrounded by examples of both vintage and modern equipment. The walls were covered with photos documenting agricultural history, and Maddie's logo, a beautiful design showing old and new technology intertwined like growing vines, was displayed prominently above the entrance. Farmers came from 3 states to attend the opening, agricultural students from the local community college, equipment manufacturers interested in partnering, reporters covering what one journalist called the unlikely alliance between a billionaire tech CEO and a small-town mechanic that's revolutionizing how we think about farming. Luke stood at the back of the facility during Emily's opening remarks, watching her address the crowd with confidence and warmth, explaining their vision of preservation and innovation working together rather than in opposition. Maddie stood next to him, practically bursting with pride, occasionally waving at people she recognized from her now regular visits to the farm. "Your dad and I met when we were 17, Emily was saying, "working on that tractor you see behind me. We thought we were just fixing a broken machine, but really we were learning something much more important, that the best solutions honor what came before while embracing what comes next. That tradition and innovation aren't enemies, they're partners. And that sometimes the most valuable things are the ones we refuse to replace just because something newer is available." She caught Luke's eye across the crowd, smiled that crooked smile he'd fallen in love with at 17 and again at 33. This facility represents that philosophy. We're not choosing between old and new. We're choosing both. We're teaching mechanics to understand vintage equipment and modern technology. We're helping farmers blend time-tested practices with cutting-edge tools. We're building something that lasts by respecting what's lasted already. The applause that followed was enthusiastic and genuine, and Luke felt something settle in his chest, a sense of completion, of circles closing, of stories finding their proper endings. This was what they'd been working toward, consciously or not, since that July night 15 years ago when Emily had told him she was leaving for California. After the ceremony, after the tours and the interviews and the endless handshaking, Luke found himself alone in the facility with Emily and Maddie. The sun was setting through the large windows, painting everything in amber light, and for a moment they all just stood there, taking in what they'd built. "It's really real," Maddie said, her voice awed. "We actually did it." "We did," Emily confirmed, "all three of us. You designed the logo and the bee habitat integration. Your dad developed the training curriculum and hired the staff. I handled the boring stuff like financing and permits." "Nothing you do is boring," Luke said, sliding an arm around Emily's waist. "Complicated, stressful, occasionally infuriating, but never boring." Emily leaned into him, tired but happy. "Same to you, mechanic. Same to you." They stood like that as the sun set completely, the facility's lights clicking on automatically, bathing the space in warm illumination. The tractor at the center looked different in this light, not like an antique or a relic, but like exactly what it was, a bridge between past and future, a testament to the value of fixing what's broken instead of throwing it away, a symbol of second chances and the hard work required to make them succeed. "Dad?" Maddie's voice was soft, thoughtful. "Do you think Mom would be proud if she could see all this?" Luke considered the question carefully, knowing it mattered. "I think your mom would be happy that you're happy, and that we've built something good. I don't know if proud is the right word. That requires a level of involvement she hasn't earned, but I think she'd be glad we found our way to something that works for us." "I'm proud," Maddie said firmly. "I'm proud of you for building this, for not giving up on Emily even when she was being stubborn and scared, for showing me that staying somewhere you love isn't the same as being stuck." She looked at Emily. "And I'm proud of you for learning how to ask for help, for fighting for your company, for letting us into your life even though it was scary." Emily crouched down, wrapped Maddie in a tight hug. "I'm proud of you too, brilliant girl, for being brave when adults around you were being complicated, for asking hard questions, for designing a logo that's way better than anything the professionals came up with." "It really is better," Luke agreed. "We should get it printed on business cards immediately." They locked up the facility, their facility, built from scratch and second chances, and the stubborn belief that some things were worth the effort to repair, and walked out into the cool September night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, training programs to refine, equipment to maintain, farms to serve, a partnership to navigate with all its inevitable complications. But tonight, they were just three people who'd found their way to each other through broken tractors and rainstorms and board meetings, and the courage to believe that endings could become beginnings if you were willing to do the work. Luke's truck was parked next to Emily's, and Maddie climbed into Emily's passenger seat without asking, a routine they'd developed over months of shared dinners and collaborative planning sessions. Luke caught Emily's hand before she could follow. "Hey, I never properly thanked you." "For what?" "For breaking down, for letting me see you scared and imperfect, for showing Maddie that strong people can ask for help and that admitting you need someone isn't weakness." Luke pulled her close, kissed her forehead. for coming back, for staying, for fighting for us when it would have been easier to walk away. I'm done walking away, Emily said softly. From you, from here, from the life we're building. I'm done choosing fear over love. It took me 15 years and almost losing everything to figure it out, but I finally got there. We both did. Better late than never. They stood in the parking lot for another moment, reluctant to let the day end, both knowing that tomorrow would bring reality crashing back, but wanting to hold on to this perfect completion for just a little longer. Then Maddie honked Emily's horn, because of course she did, and they both laughed and separated, climbing into their respective vehicles. Luke followed Emily's truck down the winding road toward the farm, toward home, toward whatever came next. In his rearview mirror, the new facility's lights were still visible. The sign with Maddie's logo illuminated against the darkness. Harlan and Carter. Where tradition meets tomorrow. He'd fixed a lot of broken things in his life. Engines and transmissions and relationships fractured by fear and miscommunication. But this was the repair he was most proud of. Taking something broken 15 years ago and working patiently, carefully, honestly, to restore it into something stronger than it had been originally. Not just a relationship or a business or a family, but all three intertwined like Maddie's logo design, each part supporting and strengthening the others. Some things, Luke thought as he pulled into the farm's driveway and watched Emily park next to him and Maddie jump out chattering about dinner plans, were absolutely worth the effort it took to keep them running. Even when the repairs seemed impossible, even when everyone else said to scrap it and start over, even when the easier path would have been to walk away, some things were worth fighting for. And this, he realized as Emily took his hand and Maddie grabbed his other one, and they walked together toward the house that was slowly becoming theirs in all the ways that mattered. This was definitely one of those things.